Chapter 1850. Shinjilia was holding the phone normally, but Yi Chanshan could clearly hear the voice coming from the other end. Yi Chanshan picked up the bread and took a bite without saying a word. Shinjilia glanced at Yi Chanshan, then stood up and walked to the balcony. Yi Chanshan looked at him and felt a little guilty. Wasn't she being too selfish? She knew that Shinjilia's grandmother didn't like her, but she still wanted to be with Shinjilia. But Shinjilia's parents seemed to have a good impression of her. Yi Chanshan felt a little conflicted. When she saw Shinjilia's helpless and angry expression, she took a sip of milk and stood up. Shinjilia looked over and looked at Yi Chanshan with a puzzled expression. Yi Chanshan didn't walk toward him. Instead, she picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. "I'm going to work." "You haven't finished your breakfast yet?" "Yeah." Yi Chanshan walked over and drank the milk in one gulp. She picked up the bread and ate it as she walked. Shinjilia wanted to say something, but the phone call seemed to have become a storm. When Yi Chanshan walked out of the corridor, her heart was empty. She finished the bread quickly and pressed the button for the elevator. No hurry. No hurry. Who knew what it would be like after 2 years? Perhaps, as Shinjilia's grandmother had said, she would die at the age of 28. Or perhaps, as the blind uncle had said, she had been harmed by a villain. Or perhaps, neither of them had been accurate, and because she had revealed the secret of heaven, God had changed her fate and given her and Shinjilia a happy life. Ding. The elevator arrived at the station. There was someone inside, but Yi Chanshan didn't notice. She walked in absent-mindedly. Her mind was clouded and she stood inside the elevator. The elevator remained silent. The person behind her suddenly said, "You haven't pressed the button for the elevator yet." It sounded like a man in his 30s. Yi Chanshan was startled by his sudden words. She instinctively looked back and saw a man dressed in black and wearing a black cap. He was very tall and his face was mostly covered by the cap. Yi Chanshan could only see the purple pimples on half of his face. She only glanced at it for a moment before she snapped back to her senses. She turned her head and pressed the button for the first floor. After he pressed it, he suddenly remembered. She did forget to press the elevator button, but the man inside had obviously been standing there for a long time. He also knew to remind her that she hadn't pressed the button, but why didn't he come up and press the button himself? Yi Chanshan found the man a little strange and subconsciously turned her head to look at him. The man seemed to notice that Yi Chanshan was looking at him. He reached out to press down on the brim of his hat. As if he was deliberately lowering his voice, he asked, "What are you looking at?" "How fierce." Yi Chanshan turned her head away and stopped looking at him. Ding. The elevator arrived. When the door opened, Yi Chanshan walked out. But before she could take a step forward, the man behind her immediately stepped forward. Yi Chanshan was caught off guard and bumped into him. By the time she came back to her senses, the man had already walked a few steps away. There was a small white bag on the ground. Yi Chanshan glanced at it and shouted, "Hey, you dropped something." Chapter 1851. As he shouted, he strode forward and reached out to snatch it. Yi Chanshan's hand was knocked away, and she felt a burning pain. When she looked up, the man reached out and pushed her away at the same time. His hand quickly reached forward. Yi Chanshan clearly saw a cold glint flash past her eyes. Yi Chanshan screamed and fell backward. The cold light passed through the place where she had just been standing and missed. The man's face, which was only half exposed, was a little ferocious. He clutched the small white thing in his hand tightly and walked toward Yi Chanshan without a word. Yi Chanshan's face turned pale and she screamed, "Ah! Help!" She retreated backward in panic and clumsiness. "Who's there?" A loud shout came from outside. The man in black immediately turned around and saw the security guard behind him. He gritted his teeth and glared at Yi Chanshan. Then he ran to the emergency exit and disappeared without a trace. When the security guard saw Yi Chanshan, he immediately ran up and asked, "Miss, are you okay?" Yi Chanshan felt relieved. Her heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was about to jump out. She looked up at the security guard's face and suddenly realized that her body was trembling. She collapsed to the ground. Yi Chanshan immediately opened her bag. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and dialed Shinjilia's number. Shinjilia's line was busy. "Hello, please don't hang up. The number you have dialed is busy." Before the mechanical female voice could finish speaking, the call was picked up. "Hello." It was Shinjilia's voice. Yi Chanshan's heart trembled violently. She pouted and tears fell down her face. She shouted, "Old Shin, I was almost killed." When Shinjilia picked up Yi Chanshan, she was sitting in the security booth with red eyes. When she saw Shinjilia coming over, Yi Chanshan stood up and threw herself at him. She sniffled and said, "Let's move." It was so scary. I thought I was going to die. Yi Chanshan's body was trembling, and Shinjilia's heart was also trembling. He hugged her and whispered, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. Don't go to work today. Let's go home first." Okay. Yi Chanshan nodded. She felt like her whole body was about to melt. Yi Chanshan was still a little traumatized when she went upstairs. Shinjilia called Yi Chanshan to apply for a leave of absence and explain the situation to her. He then started packing his luggage and said, "Let's stay in a hotel for a few days. We'll move in when I find an apartment." Yi Chanshan hugged him and looked up at him. She said, "Why don't I ask my sister or Lily if there are any vacant houses available? Why don't we buy their second-hand houses?" "Sure, you decide. I still have to renovate, decorate, and wait for the new house. I don't think I can stay here anymore. Old Shin, do you think that person will come back for me?" "Don't think too much, it won't happen. But Grandma and Uncle Blind told me to be careful of villains. Could this drug addict be a villain? I feel so scared." "It's okay. Don't think too much." Shinjilia tapped her on the forehead. "Your brain is so active, and your imagination is so rich. How could you be willing to be a comics reviewer? You should draw a comic yourself." Chapter 1852. Shinjilia found it a little funny, but he also felt a little defeated. He wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. "Why can't I even change the subject? Be good. Don't be afraid. It'll be fine." Yi Chanshan still found it a little strange. She looked up and asked, "What if he comes back to look for me?" "He won't. He won't be able to find you. We'll stay outside for a few days. When we find a place to live, we'll come back and move." "Okay." Yi Chanshan still felt a little scared. After thinking about it, she went to look for the remote surveillance camera she had bought in the past. She had bought it for fun, but Yi Chanshan had never used it. It was two small cameras with powerful night vision capabilities. Although it wasn't particularly expensive and the quality wasn't very high, it was enough to ensure her safety. Yi Chanshan plugged in the two devices and placed one of them on the shoe cabinet in the entryway. The shoe cabinet was very high and there were ornaments on it. She placed the small camera behind the ornaments, and the angle of view just happened to cover the entire living room. Surveillance camera? Shinjilia looked at the gadgets that Yi Chanshan was fiddling with. He chuckled and asked, "Is this kind of surveillance useful?" "It doesn't matter if it's useful or not. Anyway, it's just sitting there. I'll just use it. I don't feel very comfortable." Yi Chanshan looked at Shinjilia with a little grievance. What had just happened had really scared her. Yi Chanshan had lived for 26 years, and she had never encountered such a thing. In the past, she had always felt that such things were very far away from her. But when she really encountered it, Yi Chanshan suddenly realized that in fact, death was actually around her. If he was unlucky, he might be ambushed while walking on the street or going down the stairs and lose his life. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that the world was extremely scary. Yi Chanshan installed another small camera in the room. After looking for a long time for an angle, she finally decided to place it at the top of the wardrobe. She connected it to the internet. The phone screen already displayed all the movements in the entire room. Shinjilia watched her toss and turn and let her do as she pleased. He was glad that she was fine. Yi Chanshan packed a few changes of clothes and took the computer with her. After confirming that all the valuables were there, Yi Chanshan walked out. After packing up, Yi Chanshan gave Yi Yuyu a call. Yi Yuyu answered the call very quickly. When she saw that it was Yi Chanshan, she was pleasantly surprised. "Sis. Yuyu, where are you?" "I'm at home, do you want to come over? It just so happens that I made some small cakes. Come over and have a taste." After she said that, she suddenly remembered that it was Monday. "Are you going to work today?" "I asked for leave." Sob, "You, I was scared to death just now." Yi Chanshan began to complain, but she quickly shut her mouth and said, "I'll go to your place. Wait for me." "Yeah, come on." Yi Yuyu looked at the time. It was past 9 am. Shinjilia's car had been in the garage for a long time. It hadn't been driven for more than half a month, so it was covered in a layer of dust. She said, "I thought you drove it away. What a waste of you. Let's take it to the car wash." "Okay, get in the car first." Shinjilia opened the door for her. The moment Yi Chanshan got into the car, Shinjilia felt as if someone was staring at him. The feeling was fleeting, but after looking around, he didn't notice anything amiss. Chapter 1853. Shinjilia narrowed his eyes and secretly raised his guard. He had always been sensitive, so this feeling shouldn't have come from nowhere. What's wrong? Yi Chanchan noticed that Shinjilia hadn't moved for a long time. She reached out and tugged at his hand. Shinjilia shook his head gently. I'm fine. Sit tight. Yi Chanchan fastened her seatbelt, took the car door and sat down. Shinjilia looked left and right again before finally getting into the car. He fastened his seatbelt and started the engine. When Yi Chanchan saw him looking around warily, she felt a little creeped out. Shinjilia was never like that. His behavior today was very unusual. Old Shen, what did you see? Yi Chanchan asked. She suddenly felt a shiver run down her spine. He turned his head abruptly. Behind him was a beautiful luxury car with a pitch-black interior. There didn't seem to be anything strange. On the other hand, Shinjilia was shocked by Yi Chanchan's reaction. What's wrong? Shinjilia's expression was one of shock. Yi Chanchan's heart was about to jump out of her chest. I feel like I'm going crazy. What should I do? I've been so paranoid. Don't be afraid. Relax. Shinjilia said as he drove the car out of the underground parking lot. His voice was soft and steady, as if it contained an unknown magic that hypnotized and soothed her. Shinjilia didn't focus all his attention on that. Instead, he kept an eye on his surroundings and the rearview mirror. Shinjilia exited the bustling district and got on the highway. When Yi Chanchan heard him speak, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. She said, "You're opening it the wrong way around." Yes, I know. Shinjilia kept glancing at the rearview mirror as he drove. Let the car get used to the feeling of being on the road. It's not a bad idea to take a detour. Ah. This was the first time Yi Chanchan had heard of such a thing. She looked at Shinjilia and realized that he was a little distracted. What are you doing? Shoo, sit quietly. Shinjilia drove steadily. When he suddenly sped up, Yi Chanchan's heart skipped a beat. She sat there without a word. However, when he looked at the rearview mirrors on the left and right as well as the mirror in the middle, there didn't seem to be anything strange. However, Shinjilia's reaction made everyone nervous. Yi Chanchan asked hesitantly, "Is someone following us?" Shinjilia didn't reply. He just increased the speed of the car. Yi Chanchan looked back. It was not until all the cars behind them had disappeared that Shinjilia slowed down. Was someone following us just now? Yi Chanchan was already sweating profusely. She looked at Shinjilia with fear and worry in her eyes. Shinjilia shook his head. No, it was just a false alarm. Is that so? Well, I just wanted to give it a try just in case. If it's really the person from this morning, then if he follows us to Yuyu's house, Yuyu and third brother Li will probably be in danger. But fortunately, I was overthinking it. Why are you being so paranoid all of a sudden? Yi Chanchan had a nagging feeling that things weren't that simple. Shinjilia wasn't like her. Shinjilia must have seen or sensed something that made him so wary. What do you mean by fine? I was obviously infected by you. Shinjilia chuckled. He held onto the steering wheel and said helplessly, "Turn on the GPS. I'm lost." Chapter 1854. By the time they reached Yuyu's house, it had already been 2 hours since they had left. Looking at the time, it was almost 12 o'clock. This was one of the famous villas in Kingstown. The people who lived here were either rich or powerful. All the cars coming and going were luxury cars. Shinjilia's flashy Porsche looked very mediocre in comparison. Shinjilia and Yi Chanchan searched through their memories, but they couldn't find Li Jinan's house. In the end, they gave Yuyu a call. Yuyu was in the middle of cooking. When she received Yi Chanchan's call, she laughed out loud. "Where are you right now?" We're at number 3. I live in room 8. It has a black iron gate and there's a pot of red roses at the door. Go south and you'll see it when you head east." Yi Chanchan was silent for a moment before she yelled, "Can you tell me which direction is up, down, left, and right? Who can understand north, south, east, and west?" Yuyu laughed out loud. "Isn't Shinjilia coming with you? Get him to take you. I'm cooking now. I'm hanging up." When Yi Chanchan heard the busy tone, she gritted her teeth. Shinjilia glanced at her and asked, "Where?" "South then east." Shinjilia immediately stepped on the accelerator and made a U-turn. Yi Chanchan widened her eyes and asked, "You know where it is?" "Not everyone is like you who can't tell the difference between north, south, east, and west." Shinjilia was a little smug. "You haven't been a living map for so many years for nothing." "Bah. I have a GPS when I go out, I just don't know the house number." She put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest as she said, "If you have the guts, dial the house number and use the navigation now. I guarantee that we'll be there in no time." All right. I got it." Shinjilia couldn't help but laugh. "There are biscuits in the back of the car." Take them out and give them to Yuyu. Ah, when did you buy the cookies? Shinjilia was a little embarrassed. He rubbed his nose and said, It's been a long time. My colleague gave me this last time. I can't go to Yuyu's house empty-handed, so I took it as a gift. She's my sister. Why are you being so polite? Although he said that, he still turned around and took out the biscuit. It was quite an expensive brand, and the packaging looked quite high-end. But how long have you put it there? Can it still be eaten? Sure. This kind of thing has a shelf life of at least half a year, right? It's edible. In fact, Shinjilia wasn't sure either. In the end, he flipped through the expiration date. After confirming that there were no problems with it, he finally felt at ease. We're here. Yi Qianshan saw a particularly luxuriant cluster of red roses. They climbed up the railing and sprouted a bud. Behind the black iron railings was a beautifully landscaped courtyard. One could tell at a glance that it was huge. It wasn't Yi Qianshan's first time here, but she was still amazed by the sight. With envy in her eyes, Yi Qianshan unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car with the biscuits. The expression on Yi Qianshan's face wasn't obvious, but Shinjilia saw it clearly. Without making a sound, he parked the car before getting out and pressing the doorbell. The door opened automatically. Yi Qianshan and Shinjilia walked in and saw the luxurious yet minimalistic interior decoration. Yuyu had just finished preparing the last dish. When she saw them enter, she said, You're here. We're just about to eat. Sis, can you give me a hand? Chapter 1855. It's been so long since you've come to see me. How dare you say that? Yuyu's belly was propped up. She looked great. Her skin was rosy and smooth. Yi Qianshan had seen a few pregnant women before, but none of them looked like Yuyu. One look was enough to tell that she was living a good life. Yuyu's steps were light as she carried the dishes out. If it weren't for her belly, it would be hard to tell that she was pregnant. Tisk, is your man back for dinner? Of course he is, Yuyu replied briskly. She looked at the clock hanging in the middle of the living room and said, It's almost time. She turned to the kitchen and took out the dishes that she had just prepared. Yi Qianshan washed her hands and helped to get the bowls and chopsticks. She had just scooped the rice when Yuyu suddenly said, 3, 2, 1. Ding dong. The doorbell rang just in time. Yuyu immediately rushed to the door. Yi Qianshan was shocked when she saw that and said, No way. How did she hear him coming back from so far away? Or was Yuyu just used to Li Jinnan's return at this time? The door opened. Yuyu was like a lively bird as she flew into Li Jinnan's arms. Li Jinnan caught her in his arms. His eyes were filled with tenderness. You're back. Yeah, Li Jinnan replied without much emotion. He then noticed that there were guests inside. Yuyu pulled Li Jinnan along and said, My sister is here and so is Shinjilia. She lowered her voice and whispered, He might even be my brother-in-law in the future. When Shinjilia saw Yuyu's expression, the smile on his face was pure and unpretentious. He looked truly happy. Yuyu had stayed with the Shin family for a period of time. Shinjilia had seen her almost every day. At that time, Yuyu had only been deliberately trying to please him. The only other thing she had shown was her obvious depression. Thank goodness. Thank goodness that she had divorced Shinluo on. Otherwise, Yuyu would never have been happy in this life. Li Jinnan laughed as he was pulled up by Yuyu. His eyes were fixed on Yuyu's feet. He didn't forget to remind her, Be careful. The floor is slippery. I won't. I walk around every day. It's fine. She tugged at Li Jinnan and said to Shinjilia and Yi Qianshan, We'll go wash our hands first. Sit down. It's time to eat. Yi Qianshan had never been one to be pretentious. She immediately sat down and poured herself and Shinjilia a bowl of rice. You're living such a good life. Every day you come up with new ways to cook for your husband. You wait for your husband to go to work while you wait at home to give birth, Yi Qianshan said with a hint of envy in her voice. Of course Shinjilia could tell. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, You can do the same in the future. Of course, I want to be like this in the future, but we'll talk about it when I have children. If I don't have children and don't work, then I'll be too lazy. Yi Qianshan looked at Shinjilia with yearning in her eyes. Can you afford to support me in the future? That goes without saying. Shinjilia extended his hand and tapped Yi Qianshan's forehead. He said, Even if you asked me to raise 8 or 10 more children, I'd be able to afford it. Bah, 8 or 10 children. Who do you want to have them with? With you, of course. Who else can I have them with? Chapter 1856. Nonsense. Uncle Blind Man also said that it's just a possibility. Might not happen. Why are you so concerned about it? The smile on Yi Chanshan's face disappeared completely. She sighed softly. Yi Yuyu and Li Jinan walked over quickly. When she saw Yi Chanshan's unhappy expression, Yi Yuyu walked over curiously and asked, "What's wrong?" "Sup? Yuyu, what do you think I'll do if I can't have children in the future?" Yi Chanshan looked at Yi Yuyu with hurt written all over her face. Yi Yuyu laughed and sat down on the chair that Li Jinan had brought out for her. She replied, "How is that possible? Why can't you have children out of nowhere?" As she spoke, Yi Yuyu's face was full of ambiguity. She looked at Yi Chanshan and then at Shinjilia and asked, "Are the two of you preparing to have children? Didn't they just get back together not too long ago?" Yi Yuyu was a little surprised. She hadn't expected that after getting back together, not only would they be talking about marriage, but they would also be preparing to get pregnant. Yi Chanshan pouted her lips. She felt defeated and replied, "That's not it. I've just encountered a few things that haven't been going my way lately." He told Yi Yuyu in detail about her visit to Shinjilia's parents in the capital, as well as what Shinjilia's grandmother and the blind uncle had said. Yi Chanshan's bitter expression, coupled with the aggrieved expression on her face, made her look extremely pitiful. "You, I'm so envious of you now. You have such a happy family and your belly is so big. What if I really can't have children in the future just like they said?" "That won't happen. That old lady is a fraud." Yi Yuyu was a little annoyed. "She's spouting nonsense. She even said that I'd get into big trouble when I turned 25. I'm 26 now. What big trouble can I get into?" Yi Chanshan's eyes widened when she heard that. "That can't be. When did she say that?" "2 years ago," Shinjilia replied. "But you're really in big trouble now. Have you forgotten?" Yi Chanshan covered her mouth in disbelief. "That Guan guy and Shinluo, and are in jail. Have you forgotten?" "That's right. Of course not. That was when I was 26 years old. She said I was 25 years old. You hung a steel wire and fell from it." She couldn't help but link the incident with Yi Yuyu. "Didn't you stay in the hospital for many days at that time? Wasn't that a big deal?" Yi Chanshan was a little paranoid. Yi Yuyu was at a loss for words. All right. If that's the case, aren't I perfectly fine right now?" "That's different." Yi Chanshan panicked. "They're saying that I won't be able to have children in the future. It's over. It's over. What should I do?" "That won't happen. You've been the only one thinking about it." Shinjilia held her hand. He felt helpless and defeated. "They're just saying it's a possibility. Trust me. I'll tell you about it when we get home tonight. You'll know. I should give her a simple treatment tonight. Otherwise, Yi Chanshan's mental health will deteriorate sooner or later." Shinjilia was filled with regret. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have been in such a hurry and brought you home." In the end, Yi Chanshan knew that she might have gone overboard. She quickly pressed his hand down and said, all right. I'll stop talking. Let's eat." Chapter 1857. When Yi Chanshan heard Shinjilia's words, she didn't say a word. She only looked up at Yi Yuyu. Yi Yuyu shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. You're too scared to think that it might be true. If you think about it from a different perspective, things will be much better." "Think about it from a different perspective?" "That's right." Yi Yuyu looked at Yi Chanshan and took a sip of the soup. "Perhaps it's just an excuse that the old madam of the Shin family wants to object to you being together with Jilia. Perhaps it's just a lie that she came up with to make you back off? But the blind uncle in our town said it too." "Who's the blind uncle?" "He's a blind man in Yun Town who's possessed by a deity. He's more than 10 years older than Dad, but he looks older. You've probably met him before." "I see." Yi Yuyu nodded her head. She was silent for a moment before saying, "Perhaps the old lady knew that you were going to look for the blind uncle and colluded with him?" "How is that possible?" Yi Chanshan found it absurd. "Why is it impossible? Didn't you say that the blind uncle was possessed by a deity?" "The old lady claimed to be half a deity. Perhaps they have a mysterious channel in a world that we can't see that allows them to communicate with each other. Then they colluded with each other to deceive you." Yi Yuyu's words sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Li Jinan felt a little uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and picked up a piece of food for her. "Eat your food. Don't be superstitious." "That's right." Shinjilia also picked up a piece of cake for Yi Chanshan. With a serious expression he said, "This is the era of science. Don't believe in such nonsense. Even if it's true, it doesn't matter. Medical science is so advanced now." Yi Yuyu nodded her head vehemently. When Li Jinan saw that, he chimed in and said, "At most we can have a test tube baby. The child will still be our own." When Yi Chanshan heard that, her lips twitched. Yi Yu nudged Li Jinan and glared at him. She then looked at Yi Chanshan and said, "Don't listen to my husband. Don't let your imagination run wild. If God is useful, what's the point of science?" "Yeah, Yu is right. Let's eat. Let's not talk about this anymore." Shenjilia picked up the bowl and stuffed it into Yi Chanshan's hand. Only then did Yi Chanshan stop talking and bury her head in her food. Yi Yu sipped her soup and looked at Li Jinan. She asked, "I heard that our company is preparing to adapt a novel into a television series. What's it called?" 99 Days of Hidden Marriage, Li Jinan said. "It's about a female gangster who was framed and had her tongue cut off. She became mute. Later she married her Prince Charming. 3 years later she got pregnant and was kidnapped. She died. Then she was reborn." "It can't be. Isn't her husband going to save her?" "No, I'm going on a date with the white moonlight in my heart." "No way, isn't she pregnant with his child?" "Apparently the child isn't his. It's his younger brother's, so, D*MN. That man is such a jerk." Yi Chanshan's face was filled with anger. "When is the television series airing? I'm going to go and scold him." Li Jinan smiled. "It hasn't started filming yet. Just wait. If such a man existed in real life, his corpse would probably be whipped," Shenjilia interjected. "One Lily, ha ha ha." Chapter 1858. Yi Chanshan and Yi Yu both looked over. Shenjilia felt a little creeped out by their stares. "What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" Shenjilia felt a little uncomfortable. "It's not just being whipped. You should be cut into pieces and minced into minced meat." Yi Chanshan gritted her teeth. "You mustn't be that kind of man in the future. You won't have a good ending if you abandon someone after you've used them." Shenjilia could even sense Yi Chanshan's murderous aura. He nodded his head repeatedly and said, "Got it, got it." Yi Yu laughed and asked, "Why did you suddenly come looking for me today? Isn't it Monday today? Don't you have to work?" Usually at this time Yi Chanshan would be busy with work. Where would she find the time to hang out with him? At the mention of that, Yi Chanshan felt even more aggrieved. She looked like she was about to burst into tears as she said, "Why have I been so unlucky lately? Things like this always happen, boo-hoo, let me tell you." He recounted everything that had happened this morning in detail. She said, "That can't be. That's too dangerous. I think it's best that you don't go back for the next few days. Why don't you come stay with me for a few days? We still have a few empty rooms here. Feel free to stay." Yi Yu's heart skipped a beat. Yi Chanshan shook her head pitifully and replied, "We're planning to stay in a hotel." "Why are you staying in a hotel? Just stay at my place. And is that okay?" Yi Yu looked at Li Jinan. Li Jinan nodded his head. "I'm fine with that. Sister-in-law can accompany my wife at the same time. With 2 women around, it won't be too boring." Shenjilia didn't think it was appropriate and said, "Forget it. We have to work during the day. It's not good for a pregnant woman to have a good rest. Chanshan, let's just stay in a hotel." "Well, let's stay in the hotel. But Yu, brother-in-law, I want to ask, do you have any unused houses in your hands? The kind of second-hand houses that you want to sell to us?" Li Jinan's house was definitely very safe. Moreover, since it was a second-hand house owned by one of their own, the facilities inside must be trustworthy, saving them trouble. Yi Chanshan looked at him expectantly, her eyes sparkling. Yi Yu thought for a moment and looked at Li Jinan. She asked, "Didn't you mention that your brother's house in Jiangzhou was going to be sold?" Yi Chanshan almost spat out her saliva. Jiangzhou? Jiangzhou was a famous luxury villa district in Kingstown. Yi Chanshan would never be able to afford a house like that. "I say, Yu, you think too highly of me. The villas in Jiangzhou are not something that ordinary people like us can afford." When Shenjilia heard that, he looked up and asked, "Is it expensive?" "What do you mean by expensive?" "That was quite expensive. It should be at least in tens of millions, right?" Yi Chanshan drank a glass of fruit juice to calm her nerves. Li Jinan rubbed his nose and replied, "My brother does want to sell it, but the villa was renovated badly. It's not suitable for you to stay in. I do have a smaller commercial apartment here. It's about 130 square feet. It's in Dragon City." Dragon City? That place was also a high-end residence, but the price should be acceptable. Chapter 1859. Shenjilia didn't answer Yi Chanshan. Instead, he looked at Li Jinan and asked, "Can you make a move?" Li Jinan nodded slightly. Sure. I took it from my second brother. I don't have the title deed with me. If you want it, I'll get it from my brother. That works? Yi Qianshan was speechless. Have you lived there before? I lived there for a while, but I moved to the company, so I don't live there anymore. I see. Yi Qianshan nodded her head and looked at Shinjilia. Shall we go take a look later? Sure. After dinner, Yi Qianshan helped Yi Yuyu clean up and wash the dishes. The two men, Shinjilia and Li Jinan, sat opposite each other on the sofa and chatted happily. After cleaning up, Yi Qianshan and Yi Yuyu walked in the direction of the sofa in the living room. At a glance, they saw the smiles on the faces of the two men. Are you done? Shinjilia looked at Yi Qianshan, stood up and said, Let's go. Brother-in-law said he'd take us to have a look. So fast? Well, you guys are moving anyway. The apartment hasn't been empty for long, so it should be very clean inside. I don't have anything to do in the afternoon. Let's go together. Li Jinan picked up the car key. Honey, do you want to go together? Since you're all going, I'll go with you. She hadn't gone out in a long time, so she was a little excited. I'm going to change. The corners of Li Jinan's mouth turned up. He turned to look at Yi Qianshan and Shinjilia and said, I'll go help her. You guys take a seat first. Alright, go ahead. When Li Jinan's silhouette disappeared down the stairs, Yi Qianshan nudged Shinjilia and asked, What were you talking about just now? No, we were just chatting casually. What did you talk about? I've always felt that my brother-in-law is quite aloof. How can you chat with him so happily? What the hell? Shinjilia couldn't help but laugh. Of course you're cold to girls, but we men are different. We have common topics to talk about. What? A car? Beautiful women? Yi Qianshan glanced at him in disdain. That's all men get when they get together. Yeah, beautiful, we're talking about wives. He's talking about his wife, I'm talking about mine. Bah. Who's your wife? Yi Qianshan stood up. We're not married yet. Shinjilia held her in his arms. It's only a matter of time. Yi Qianshan smiled and looked at him. The atmosphere was harmonious and peaceful. Upstairs, Yi Yuyu had found some clothes. When she saw Li Jinan come up, she took one look and asked, Nan, do I look good in this? Nice. You haven't seen it yet. Yi Yuyu pouted. Li Jinan walked up and looked at the dress. He gestured and said, You look good in anything. Since we're going out, let's go to second uncle's house on the way. I really miss those children. Sure, Li Jinan agreed without hesitation. He started to help Yi Yuyu change into her clothes. When they came down, Yi Qianshan and Shinjilia were sitting on the sofa, looking at their phones. When they saw them coming down, they stood up together. Shinjilia replied, I told you not to be so paranoid. Isn't everything fine now? When Yi Yuyu heard that, she asked curiously, What are you doing? Didn't I almost get into an accident this morning? I installed a surveillance camera at home. I just turned it on to take a look. Yi Yuyu felt her hair stand on end. Are you afraid that that person will find his way to your house? It's better to be safe than sorry. Don't scare yourself. He's not that resourceful. Shinjilia had no choice but to tap her forehead. Let's go. Dash. Chapter 1860. Li Jinan drove his own car, so he naturally followed Yi Yuyu. The four of them in the two cars followed Li Jinan around. After a round of discussion, they decided on a destination. Yi Yuyu wanted to go to Li Xiqing's house to see the children, so Yi Qianshan and Shinjilia suggested that they go to the hotel to rest. They parted ways. Yi Yuyu hadn't visited the children in a long time. After buying some toys for them, she went to Yushio. At that time, the children had returned from school. They sat in the living room chatting and doing their homework. Li Mosen was like a little adult. He watched Li Jianyue do her homework, occasionally giving her pointers and frowning. When Yi Yuyu arrived, Li Jianyue was pleasantly surprised. She put down her pencil and called out, Auntie? Her small body was obviously much thinner than before. In the past she had been a chubby little girl. Now she had less meat on her body, but she had grown taller. Li Jinan felt a sense of danger. He stood in front of his wife and used one hand to block Li Jianyue. He said, Be careful. Your little cousin is in your auntie's stomach. I know. Li Jianyue's face was round and her skin was pink and tender. Her eyes were like black agate, crystal clear and bright. She looked at Yi Yuyu's belly and said, There's a little sister in my mother's belly too. Li Jinan raised his eyebrows slightly and chuckled. He picked Li Jianyue up and asked, How do you know it's a little sister? My daddy said it. Daddy said that the thing in mommy's stomach must be a little sister. Li Jianyue tilted her head and kept looking at Yi Yuyu's stomach. I think Auntie is also having a little sister in her stomach. Why? Yi Yuyu adored the little girl. She was pretty, lively, and quick-witted. Granny Rong said that a round stomach will give birth to a little sister, and a pointy stomach will give birth to a little brother, but I've never seen a pointy stomach before. So, Auntie must be having a little sister in your stomach too. Yi Yuyu couldn't help but laugh. She walked over and touched Li Jianyue's little face. She said, "You're so mischievous. Come down. I bought you a toy." Li Jianyue was a little surprised, but before she could get excited, she turned her head to take a look. She looked left and right. When she realized that no one was coming out, she wiggled her body excitedly and got down from Li Jinan's body. When Li Jinan saw that, he knew what the little guy was up to. He reached out and knocked on her little head. "You haven't finished your homework, have you?" Li Jianyue covered her head and pouted. She looked a little unhappy and said, "Who said that? I'm done. It's just that there are a lot of mistakes." Li Mosen walked over with a small notebook and said, "Uncle, take a look at Ursu's homework." Li Jinan rarely had time to visit the little guys, but he knew that Li Mosen had skipped a grade and was in the 3rd grade, and his academic performance was particularly good. As for Li Jianyue, she could only stay in the 1st year. When he took Li Jianyue's notebook, he didn't have much hope in his heart. However, when he opened the first page of the notebook, he was still shocked by Li Jianyue's ugly handwriting. The corner of his mouth twitched as he asked, "What kind of homework is this?" "A dictation," Li Jianyue said loudly. "I feel that my handwriting is all correct. I even looked it up in the dictionary." Chapter 1861. Li Jinan laughed out loud and read it aloud. "Who taught you that?" When Li Jianyue heard that, she was not convinced. She put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest. "Isn't that so, Auntie? I wrote Wolf gets raped. Is that wrong?" Yi Yuyu was arranging the toys for the little girl. When she heard that, she didn't even look up and replied, "There's nothing wrong with being in cahoots. Isn't that an idiom?" "That's right." Li Jianyue walked over angrily and said, "Little uncle is a bad guy. Brother Mosen is laughing at me. You're laughing at me too." Li Jinan couldn't help but laugh. He looked over and said, "You're taking your own breasts." "Ah." Li Jinan couldn't hold it in any longer. "Taking your own breasts? Isn't that a little too difficult?" "What?" Yi Yu looked over. "What's wrong with that? You didn't write it wrong." Li Jinan squatted down and took the notebook over to read it with his wife. When Yi Yu saw it, she laughed out loud. Li Jianyue's face turned red. She went forward and snatched the notebook from Li Jinan's hand. She turned around and sat down on the sofa angrily. "What's going on?" Su Qinxi's gentle voice was heard. Following that was the sound of slow footsteps. When Li Jianyue saw Su Qinxi, she pouted and shouted, "Mom, they're all laughing at me." Su Qinxi walked down the stairs with a man following behind her. When Li Xiqing saw Li Jinan, he raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "What's the wind today?" Li Jinan stood up and helped Yi Yu up. He said, "I have nothing to do today, so I brought my wife here to play." He looked at Su Qinxi's belly and exclaimed, "Sister-in-law's belly is growing too big. It's not any slower and I'll die." Li Xiqing glanced at Su Qinxi's belly and sighed. Su Qinxi blushed. She elbowed Li Xiqing and said softly, "What are you talking about?" Li Xiqing blocked her hand and said sternly, "What are you thinking?" "I'm saying that taking care of you and the kids will distract me." Su Qinxi blushed even more, gave him a stare, and then went to sit with her daughter on the sofa. Li Jinan was experienced, so he smiled ambiguously and didn't point it out. Yi Yuyu was still playing with Li Jianyue's toys. She said, "Ursu, little aunt bought you a fantasy series of Lego. Do you want to play with me?" She looked at her notebook and said, "I haven't finished my homework yet." With that, she looked at Li Xiqing pitifully and said, "Daddy?" With a smile on his lips, Li Xiqing reached out. Li Jianyue subconsciously put the book in his palm, but before she put it down, she immediately retracted her hand. She pouted and warned, "Daddy, don't laugh at me." Li Xiqing didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. He picked up the booklet and said, "Go ahead and play with Auntie." Li Jianyue jumped excitedly. She turned around and skipped over to Yi Yuyu's side. She shouted, "Little Auntie, I'm here." Seeing his daughter's expression, Li Xiqing smiled slightly and flipped open the exercise book. His smile immediately froze. After a moment of silence, he said, "Inviting the wolf into the house, the wolf is besieged and raped. There's no turning back." Li Jinan and Yi Yuyu burst out laughing at the same time. They couldn't help but laugh out loud. Poison is a guest in the village. Every festive season is missed. Chapter 1862. Li Jianyue pouted and shouted, "These are all third-grade questions. I've never learned them before." "She knows all the first-grade questions," Li Mosen said. "Dad, I think Ursu is a fast learner." "That's right. I'm very smart." Li Jianyue didn't know how wrong she was. She echoed, "Although I might have written a few words wrongly, if an old book taught me, I would definitely write them." "Mom, don't you think so?" Li Jianyue was completely unaware of how wrong she was. Su Qianxi laughed until her shoulders trembled. When she heard that, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Li Jianyue's mouth turned into a hook. Her little face and eyes were red. She said, "Bad guy, you're all laughing at me." Sob, sob, sob. Su Qianxi quickly stopped smiling and said, "Ursu, these are all third-grade knowledge, right?" "Yeah." Li Jianyue nodded. After sniffing, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Very good. A first grader can write so much. There are not so many children outside who can write so well." Su Qianxi hugged her daughter and said, "Our little princess is the smartest." Su Qianxi went over and hugged her daughter. Li Jianyue blinked and asked pitifully, "Really?" "Of course. Do you know how to put together the Lego that Andy gave you?" Su Qianxi hugged Li Jianyue and slowly walked in the direction of Yi Yuyu. Suddenly her belly was kicked. Su Qianxi was stunned. Her lips curled into a smile as she stroked her belly. Li Xiqing saw it and walked over. He asked softly, "Did this little guy kick you again?" Su Qianxi nodded. "I suddenly kicked her, but she stopped now." She turned her head and looked at Li Xiqing. Then she pulled him and said, "Accompany your daughter to put together the Lego." Li Xiqing had no choice but to walk over to the pile of Lego. He looked at it and said, "Ursu, come here." Li Ursu walked over and looked at her father obediently. "Do you know how to put it together?" "Yes." "Do you know how to read the blueprints?" "Yes." "Do you want Dad to teach you?" "No need." "Okay, then work hard on your own." Li Xiqing rubbed Li Jianyue's little head. Li Jinan was dumbfounded. Is that even possible? Isn't this a little too convenient? In this way, Li Xiqing could spend more time with his wife and work. No wonder his company was getting better and better recently. No wonder it said that daughters are the closest to their parents. It made him want to have a daughter too. He couldn't help but glance at Yi Yuyu's tummy and ask, "Are we having a son or a daughter?" Yi Yuyu looked at him and said heartlessly, "Son." Li Jinan was a little disappointed and replied, "A son is fine too. A daughter would be best." Li Xiqing heard their words and felt even more proud. Looking at his daughter, he said lovingly, "Dad will ask Granny Rong to give you a nutritious meal." Su Qianxi suddenly remembered and said, "I'll call Nanny Rong and tell her to cook more tonight. I want to eat Nanny Rong's sweet and sour fish." Li Jinan didn't stand on ceremony at all. "Add more vinegar. My wife loves it." Su Qianxi laughed and said, "All right, all right, all right." Li Jinan sat on the sofa, glanced at the family portrait hanging in the living room and asked, "Daesu, are you used to living in the capital?" Chapter 1863. Come on, you're actually very proud of yourself. Do you think I don't know? Li Jinan poured himself a glass of water and took a sip. Li Xiqing kept a faint smile on his lips and slowly shook his head. "I'm very happy that Daesu is smart, but it's not a good thing for a 6-year-old child to jump too far in his studies. His friend is still 2 years older than him. I don't have a problem with Chu skipping a grade, but I won't allow it for my child." "Are you really not allowed?" "Yeah." Li Xiqing leaned back on the sofa and slowly said, "First of all, his height is already very different from his classmates. Now that he's in the 4th grade, I've already given him a big jump." Li Jinan almost spat out. "You're too indulgent of him. Can he learn?" "He can." Li Xiqing was telling the truth and said, "I looked at his results. He's at the top of the list." Li Jinan's lips twitched. "Your children are really freakish." "Oh, I forgot, there's also a little girl. Yeah. This is what they mean by, there's always a shortcoming." Li Jinan looked at Li Jianyue meaningfully. "This little girl is like a normal child in your family. She's also very smart, but she likes to play and can't settle down to study. If she settles down to study, she'll definitely be much better than other children of her age." Li Jinan took it as him showing off. As he drank the water, he couldn't help but wonder if his future children would also be so freakish. If it's a boy, it's not bad to throw him into the army. If it's a girl, he'll raise her at home and feed her until she's fair and plump and dressed up beautifully. As he thought about it, he couldn't help but smile. He looked at Li Jianyue and asked Li Xiqing, "Your two boys are so outstanding. What kind of partner should our little girl find in the future? Not to say how much better he is than Daisu or Mosen, but he can't be too far off, right?" The two children, Li Jianxian and Li Mosen, were too outstanding compared to their peers. In comparison, it was difficult for children of the same age to surpass them. Li Xiqing had obviously thought about this problem as well. Feeling a slight headache, he said, "This problem is not something we parents should consider. Let her choose for herself when she grows up." Ah, Li Jianyue seemed to feel that they were talking about her. She turned around and said, "Daddy, I forgot to tell you. Last night, I called my brother and he said that they are more relaxed with their studies, so he wants Grandpa and Grandma to bring him home to play for a few days before going back to school." Li Xiqing was pleasantly surprised, but it was gone in a flash. He nodded and said, "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" Li Jianyue stuck out her tongue and said, "I forgot. I only remembered it now." "Okay," Li Xiqing responded quietly, picked up the phone, and dialed the number he had given his son. Li Jianxian was playing soccer. The indoor soccer field was very spacious. There were only him and Yu Chulin. When he heard his phone ring, his eyes lit up. He turned to look at his phone and shouted, "Chu, I'm going to take a call." Yu Chulin was panting from the kick. When he saw Li Jianxian running away, he immediately chased after him and shouted, "Jianxian, you can do that too." Chapter 1864. When Yu Chulin heard this, he panted and ran to where they were resting. He grabbed a bottle of water and started gulping it down. Li Jianxian was obviously looking forward to his father's call. When he saw the word "Dad" on the caller ID, he immediately picked it up and shouted, "Dad!" Li Xiqing, who was far away in Kingstown, felt his heart soften when he heard his son's voice. "Yeah. What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm playing basketball with Chu. We're not done yet." "Are you busy?" "No." Li Jianxian replied immediately. The smile on Li Xiqing's face widened. He didn't care about the look in his brother's eyes and asked, "I heard that you want to go back to Kingstown?" "Yes, I've discussed it with my teacher. I can take a week off." "Dad, can I go back?" "Sure." Li Xiqing's voice was light and he agreed very quickly. Li Jianxian was overjoyed. He hadn't expected Li Xiqing to agree so readily. He exclaimed in surprise, "Dad, really? That's great." "Really? Do you want Dad to pick you up?" "No need." Li Jianxian looked very happy. He sat down and said, "Dad will stay at home with Mom. Grandma and Grandpa will take me back. Then, if I go back, can I bring my friend to Kingstown for a few days?" Li Xiqing was a little surprised and asked, "Is that the guy called Chu that you told me about?" "Yeah." Li Jianxian subconsciously glanced at Yu Chulin beside him and said, "Chu is a good friend of mine. He grew up in the capital and has never been anywhere else. Therefore, I want to bring him to Kingstown to take a look." "I'm fine with it, but will his family agree?" "Yeah." "Dad, his parents aren't at home. He's staying at Grandma's. As long as Grandma and Grandpa bring him along, his grandma will agree." When Li Xiqing heard that, he thought for a moment and said, "Sure. Bring them along." "Thank you, Dad." Li Jianxian was very excited and said, "I'll talk to our class teacher tomorrow. I'll go and tell Chu now. Bye, Dad." "Bye." Li Xiqing's lips curled up slightly as he nodded. After a while, Li Jianxian hung up the phone. Looking at the phone in front of him, Li Jianxian stood up and said to Yu Chulin excitedly, "Chu, my father has agreed. Let's apply for leave from our homeroom teacher tomorrow. After that, we can go to Kingstown together." Yu Chulin was also pleasantly surprised. "That's great. I want to meet your brother and sister. Mosen is very smart. I'm sure you'll get along well with him." Li Jianxian rubbed his palms together eagerly. "What about your sister?" Yu Chulin asked. Li Jianxian was silent for a moment before replying, "My sister is very cute. She's good-looking and she can be a little muddle-headed at times. She loves to eat, but compared to other girls of her age, my sister is more sensible." Yu Chulin understood. He smiled and nodded. He picked up the ball and said, "I'm not playing anymore. Let's go home." "All right." Li Xiqing hung up the phone and turned to look at his wife, who was playing with Legos with their daughter. "Your son wants to bring a friend home." Su Qinxi was a bit surprised and asked, "The Chu that our son always talks about?" Chapter 1865. The reason why he left his son in the capital was that he wanted Li Jianxian to warm up the lives of the two elderly people. Secondly, he wanted his son to be independent as soon as possible. Obviously, this method was very effective. Su Qianxi didn't think so. She felt a little uncomfortable and said, "How is that smart? Without parents by his side, what's the use of having a well-developed brain?" His feelings for the child have faded. Faded? Li Xiqing put down his phone and raised his eyebrows with a proud expression. Why do I feel that our feelings for each other have deepened? When Su Qianxi heard that, she looked at Li Xiqing with envy and said unhappily, "The relationship between you and your son has deepened, but it has distanced us." Li Xiqing laughed. "Our son will be back in a few days. When that time comes, there will be plenty of time for you to nurture your feelings." Su Qianxi was still unhappy. She pouted and lowered her head to continue setting up the fairy tale-themed Lego that Yi Yu had just brought with her. Li Mosen, on the other hand, lowered his head to do his homework seriously. He didn't seem to be distracted by the voices of the adults at all. Yi Yu glanced at Li Mosen and called out, "Mosen, have you finished your homework?" Li Mosen looked up and shook his head gently. "Not yet. Just a little bit more. Have you seen the toys that little auntie brought for you? Do you like them?" Li Mosen hadn't actually looked at them yet. When he heard that, he looked up and smiled. "I like them all." Yi Yu heard that and looked up at him. Her lips curled up slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She felt a little sad in her heart. This child seemed to be somewhat similar to her when she was young. He clearly called Li Xiqing daddy, and Su Qianxi mommy, but from the moment they entered the door until now, Yi Yu saw that the child was reserved. He accompanied Li Jianyue to do her homework and didn't hesitate to put down his own homework. It wasn't until Li Jianyue was with the adults that Li Mosen went to do his own homework. Although Yi Yu didn't want to think too much about it, the child's words and actions as well as the words that he had just said to her, gave Yi Yu a familiar feeling. The helplessness of living under someone else's roof and having no choice but to obey and please others. Yi Yu didn't say a word. She looked down at the young girl in front of her. Li Jianyue's face was pink and tender. Her big eyes were dark and innocent as she stared at the toy in front of her. She was very focused. One look and anyone could tell that she was a girl from a rich family. He had no scruples in his actions. He said whatever he thought and did whatever he thought. He was free and unrestrained. In contrast, Mosen seemed to have placed his position a little too neatly. After more than 10 minutes, Li Mosen finally finished his homework. After handing it to Li Xiqing for inspection, he saw Li Xiqing nodding approvingly, and a happy smile finally appeared on his mixed-race face. After he was done packing his things, he went to open the packaging of the toys that Yi Yu had brought. Boys of this age, in addition to the various figurines of popular anime characters like some car models or some heavy figures. For example, Transformers or Superman. Therefore, Yi Yu had bought him a recently trendy hand model. Chapter 1866. Hearing that, Su Qianxi suddenly felt a little uncomfortable when she saw Li Mosen holding the model box with a look of surprise on his face. Looking at Mosen, Su Qianxi walked over and asked, "Which TV show is this person from?" "It's not a TV show. It's a character from a comic book. I love it," Li Mosen said as he sat on the sofa and opened the package. "You still read comics?" "Yes, my classmates have a lot of comics. We often read them together." "Does your school give you comics?" Su Qianxi asked casually. Li Mosen paused in the middle of opening the package. He lowered his head guiltily and said, "The school doesn't give them to me." "You secretly took it?" Su Qianxi pinched his little face, feeling a bit annoyed. Li Mosen shrunk his neck and said, "Well, we read them after class. We don't read them during class." Su Qianxi saw him like this and felt helpless. She chuckled and said, "I'm not scolding you. I used to do this when I was in school." Li Mosen didn't expect this. He looked up and blinked. "Mom, were you like this before?" "Everyone is like this. Everyone has their own ideas. It's impossible to be completely obedient. As long as it doesn't affect your studies, it's okay to have fun and relax." Su Qianxi's voice was soft. She tapped the tip of Li Mosen's nose. "But don't let the teacher find out." Li Mosen was completely relaxed when he heard this. He said, "The teacher knows." She said the same thing. "But she asked us to read them secretly and not affect other students. Anything is fine." "Your teacher is so open-minded?" "Yes, my teacher likes me very much. She often gives me difficult questions to solve. My desk mate often goes to the teacher after class." Su Qianxi smiled and touched his little head. "But it's not good for you to always read your desk mate's comic books. If you want any comic books in the future, tell mom and dad will buy them for you." Also, if you want any model, just tell Mom and Dad will try their best to satisfy you. Li Mosen's eyes lit up. His fair face was full of a bright smile. His blue eyes were like two beautiful tanzanite. He looked at Su Chenxi and nodded. Yes, thank you, Mom. As he spoke, he happily hugged Su Chenxi's neck and gave her a kiss. Mommy Mosen loves you. Su Chenxi finally smiled sincerely and kissed him on the cheek. She whispered, Mom loves you too. You will always be Mom's little baby. Li Jianyue was only halfway through installing the Lego. When she saw them like this, she also stood up and ran over. She shouted, Mom, Ursa loves you too. I want to smell good too. The little guy ran up to Su Chenxi and kissed her on the cheek. Mommy, it's your turn to kiss me. Su Chenxi smiled and kissed Li Jianyue's face several times. Li Jianyue smiled happily and sat beside Li Mosen. Brother Mosen, what is a cat warrior? She asked. Li Mosen's smile faded a little. When he heard Li Jianyue's words, he corrected her. It's not cat hero. It's magic hero. What is magic man? A great hero, a great hero. Let me tell you their story. Chapter 1867. After dinner, Yi Yu played with Li Jianyue for a while before heading home with Li Jinan. When she got home, Yi Yu realized how monotonous her house was. She let out a long sigh, rubbed her belly and said, There are still a few months left. Baby mommy is so bored. Li Jinan stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. Why would I? I'll accompany you. If you're busy all day. Alright, I'm going for a prenatal checkup tomorrow. Well, I'll tell my assistant that I won't be going to the office tomorrow. Let's accompany the baby for the checkup. Li Jinan's voice was low and sexy. She smiled and tugged at his sleeve. I'm going to take a shower. Want to join me? Li Jinan was speechless. Yi Chanchan had hot pot with Shinjilia and then went to an arcade to relax for a while before heading to the hotel near the office to check in. After taking a shower and changing into a fresh set of clothes, Yi Chanchan lay in bed and waited for Shinjilia to return from his shower. She couldn't help but take out her phone and open the remote surveillance video. Yi Chanchan rewound the video and watched it from the moment they left the house. She fast-forwarded all the way, but there was no sign of anyone. Yi Chanchan was merely watching out of boredom. It was one thing to be worried, but on second thought, she didn't seem to be a threat. Apart from a ridiculously tall nose and a face full of acne, there seemed to be nothing noteworthy about that person's face. However, just these two characteristics were already extremely rare. Yi Chanchan flipped through the pages and yawned in boredom. He was sleepy. Yi Chanchan had slept too late the night before and had woken up too early that morning. She had also suffered a shock. Her energy seemed to have been depleted. The image on the phone dimmed bit by bit. The fast-forward was not particularly exaggerated, and it was enough to clearly see every scene and every moment. The powerful night vision function displayed the entire pitch-black house on the screen. Even though there was no light in the house, he could still see everything inside clearly. However, all of a sudden, a shadow appeared in the dark room. Yi Chanchan's drowsiness was immediately chased away, and she stood up straight. His heartbeat suddenly seemed to jump up to his throat, terrifying and turbulent. Yi Chanchan paused the video and saw a shadow in the distance. It was a person. He looked a little tall and strong, wearing a cap and a black t-shirt. He was sneakily walking inside. Yi Chanchan's hand trembled and she dropped her phone. She shouted, Old Shen. Shinjilia had just finished showering and was drying his hair as he walked out. When he heard Yi Chanchan's voice, he was startled. He looked over and asked, What's wrong? Yi Chanchan's body was visibly stiff. She turned her head to look at him with obvious fear on her face. There's someone at home? Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat. He strode forward and looked at the screen on the phone. On the screen, a tall man was standing impressively. The video was paused and it made people's hair stand on end. Shinjilia looked at the time. It was almost midnight. At this time, for normal office workers, most of them were already asleep. To sneak up at this time, he must be hiding something. Chapter 1868. In the dim image, the stranger looked around, opened the fridge and took out a drink for himself. It was as if he had entered his own home. His demeanor showed no signs of fear or nervousness. Such a person was either used to such behavior, or he had no fear of the family. Or perhaps, he had come prepared and had no need to worry that Yi Chanchan and I would pose any threat to him. Shinjilia squinted his eyes warily and stared at him with his amber eyes. He watched as the man looked around the living room. After making a full circle, he opened the door to the room and entered it. Is there a surveillance camera in the room? Shinjilia asked. When Yi Chanshan heard that, she immediately stood up and replied, yes. Did he enter the room? She stood up and went over to help adjust the image of the surveillance camera into the room. The moment she did so, she suddenly saw an enlarged face. In the darkness, Yi Chanshan was caught off guard. Her whole body bounced off the wall and she fell backward. Shinjilia was also startled, but he reacted quickly. He held Yi Chanshan up and stared at the cell phone in his hand. On the screen, the face laughed exaggeratedly. Yi Chanshan exclaimed, "Screenshot! Screenshot!" Shinjilia finally reacted and took a few screenshots of the image. However, the man seemed to be fearless. He grinned and gave the camera the middle finger. Then he opened his mouth and took out a white object to block the camera. When Yi Chanshan saw the scene, the fear in her heart washed over her. She had been relaxed for the whole day, but at that moment she was extremely tense. Old Shin, Yi Chanshan opened her mouth, but the trembling and fear in her voice could be clearly heard. She sounded like she was about to cry, and it made his heart tighten. Shinjilia pursed his lips and pressed her into his arms. He said, "Don't be afraid. I think it's best to get your brother-in-law's help on this matter." Li Jinan was quite famous, and his words carried a lot of weight in the local police station. At this time, if they wanted the police to dispatch the officers as soon as possible, Li Jinan would be the most suitable person to do so. However, it was already very late. It was hard to say whether he was asleep or not. "Don't be afraid. I'll make the call." Shinjilia took out his phone and dialed 110 for the police before dialing Li Jinan's number. Thank God. From the sound of his voice, Li Jinan was still very energetic. As Shinjilia summarized the incident, Li Jinan's frown deepened. Yi Chanshan couldn't help but sob softly. She asked, "Will we die? What if that person is a lunatic and wants to kill us?" Shinjilia was on the phone when he heard Yi Chanshan's fearful words. He frowned and said, "Don't let your imagination run wild. Li-san, I'm counting on you." "You have a map?" "Yes." "Send it. I'll get someone to issue a wanted order." "All right away." After Shinjilia hung up the phone, he sent the screenshot to Li Jinan on WeChat. Third elderly did not reply. After about 20 minutes, Li Jinan replied, "Waiting for news." How efficient. He realized that the woman in his arms was still trembling. He hugged her tightly and whispered, "Don't think about it. Go to sleep." Chapter 1869. Yi Chanshan was really frightened. She had never experienced such a shock since she was young. She had thought that such things could only be seen in novels and comics. She had never imagined that she would actually experience such a thing. When the Arabian Nights that she had once thought was really happening to her, other than fear, Yi Chanshan didn't feel anything else. Holding Shinjilia in her arms, Yi Chanshan looked up and asked with trembling eyes, "Aren't you afraid at all?" Of course, Shinjilia wasn't afraid at all. It was the first time he had encountered such a situation. But at a time like this, no matter how worried or afraid they were, it was useless. "You should be thankful." Shinjilia sat down and gently stroked her hair. "You should be thankful that we made the prompt decision to move away. If we had stayed there tonight, we might have gotten into trouble." Yi Chanshan looked at Shinjilia. Yi Chanshan was already scared, and when she heard that, she almost burst into tears. Shinjilia quickly comforted her and said, "It's a good thing you're not here. Don't go to work tomorrow. It's hard to guarantee that your company's things are still at home. If the criminal sees your business card and goes to your company's address, it'll be no laughing matter." Yi Chanshan suddenly remembered and said, "That's right. Why didn't I think of that? If he goes to my company, what will happen to my colleagues?" "Don't be afraid. Your company has security guards and they do a good job of security. They probably won't let strangers in." As he said that, he sighed with a hint of bitterness. "I've been stopped several times. Why is your company's security guards always changing?" Yi Chanshan relaxed a little and snorted. "Who asked you to look shifty-eyed?" "Shifty-eyed? Have you ever seen a thief or a rat as handsome as me?" Yi Chanshan's lips curled up. She turned her head and pushed him away. "Go away. You're shameless." "How am I shameless? Tell me clearly. Am I not handsome?" "You're not." Yi Chanshan turned her head away with a look of disgust. Her expression was clearly much better than before. When Shinjilia saw that, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, "How could that be? Didn't I use my beauty to attract you here?" "Bah, you're the one who's shameless, okay? No matter what, at least I managed to attract your attention." Shinjilia pounced on her. Open your eyes wide and look again. Am I handsome? Not handsome. Not handsome. Not handsome. Yi Qianqian was stubborn. She turned her head away in disgust and struggled with her hands. You're not being honest. You deserve a spanking. Shenjilia smacked her butt. Yi Qianqian snorted and took his hand away. You hit me. Even my father has never hit me before. You've grown up. Your father can't hit you anymore. Your man can. Shenjilia pulled her up and straightened her body. With a mischievous look in his eyes he said, if you continue to be stubborn, I'll hit you hard. Yi Qianqian twisted her body, but her brows were still tightly knitted together. She said, hey handsome. I'll let you be handsome for a while. So reluctant? Old Shin, do you think this is the great tribulation that Grandma talked about? When Shenjilia heard Yi Qianqian's words, he felt a little defeated. This guy. He had spent so much effort just to divert her attention. He didn't expect that after going around in a big circle, he would still end up back at the same place. Yi Qianqian didn't seem to notice and asked, but didn't you say you were 28 years old? Getting married at 28 years old. Getting killed at 28 years old. Everything happened at 28 years old. Yi Qianqian wrapped her arms around Shenjilia's neck and said in a small voice, Old Shin, I'm afraid of death. Chapter 1870. Married at the age of 28. Killed at the age of 28. Killed at the age of 28. Everything happened at the age of 28. Yi Qianqian wrapped her arms around Shenjilia's neck and whispered in fear, Old Shin, I'm afraid of death. Unexpectedly, Shenjilia stared at Yi Qianqian and said in a serious tone, Don't worry. Beauties are the ones with short lives. People like you can live for a long time. Yi Qianqian's eyes widened when she heard that. She gritted her teeth and reached out to pinch his waist. Ah! Shenjilia let out a half-hearted scream. He pinched her little hand and pushed her inside. Then he pinned her down with his foot and said, Do you still want to sleep? It hurts. Yi Qianqian let go of his hand, but her heart didn't completely relax. She had been extremely sleepy, but now her eyes were wide open as if she had been injected with steroids. The two of them chatted for a while. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when Yi Qianqian couldn't stand the sleepiness anymore and fell asleep. Shenjilia's mood was very heavy, and he didn't feel sleepy at all. Suddenly, Shenjilia's phone vibrated. It was an unknown number calling from Kingstown. He had a bad feeling about this. He glanced at Yi Qianqian, who had finally fallen asleep. He tried to be as gentle as possible and released her before quietly answering the call. Is this Mr. Shin? There was a hubbub of voices on the other end. It sounded a little noisy. The sound of police sirens and walkie-talkies were very clear. Shenjilia breathed a sigh of relief and replied, Yes. May I know who this is? You're from the capital? The person on the other end said casually. He then returned to the topic at hand and said, I'm a police officer. My surname is Lin. We are now downstairs from your house. Is it convenient for you to come back now? At this time? Shenjilia's voice was very low. When he heard that, he subconsciously looked at Yi Qianqian, who had just fallen asleep, and said softly, Can you briefly describe the situation? My girlfriend just fell asleep. She was scared out of her wits today. On the other end, Officer Lin expressed his understanding. He thought for a moment and said, We didn't catch them, but the scene was severely damaged. We suspect that they will come back. Now, we need you to confirm the extent of the damage. Shenjilia had expected this, but when he heard this, he couldn't help but feel his heart sink. Yi Qianqian was a simple-minded person. She couldn't help but associate it with the various fortune-telling sessions that had taken place a few days ago. She panicked and she couldn't help but link it to everything. I don't think this matter is urgent. Let's go tomorrow, Shenjilia said in a low voice. That's the only way. It's a bit late now. Officer Lin looked at the time and said, Then you guys should rest first. Comfort your girlfriend and try not to let her be alone. Got it, thank you, Officer Lin. You're welcome. Shenjilia hung up the phone and quietly walked back. As soon as he lay down, Yi Qianqian reached out and hugged him. Shenjilia's body stiffened and he turned his head to look. He realized that Yi Qianqian was looking at him with her bright and round eyes. She asked, Old Shin, did the other side inform you just now? Yes, they told us to go there for a while. We'll go there tomorrow. Has the person been caught? Yi Qianqian asked. Shenjilia's lips tightened, and he gently shook his head. No, but we'll be fine here. Chapter 1871. When Yi Chanshan saw Shinjilia's expression, she knew that things weren't as simple as they seemed. However, Yi Chanshan didn't dare to ask again. When she heard that, she hugged Shinjilia tighter. Sleep. Yi Chanshan closed her eyes, but she couldn't fall asleep. After lying in bed for a long time, Shinjilia suddenly said, "Can't sleep?" Yi Chanshan opened her eyes. Her surroundings were dark, but Shinjilia's face was clearly in front of her. "I can't sleep." Yi Chanshan changed her position and stretched. "I'm thinking, am I going to hide like this? If the police can't catch the criminal, won't we have to hide forever and avoid him? How can that be? It's only a matter of time before he gets caught. What if? There are so many drug addicts, robbers and murderers these days, but they haven't been caught, have they?" The more Yi Chanshan spoke, the more scared she became. Don't be fooled by the serial murderers on TV. There are so many drug dealers and drug lords who have been arrested. In reality, if they weren't caught, would they be broadcasted? Shinjilia was at a loss for words. He reached out and tapped Yi Chanshan on the head with his finger. "What's in your head? Heaven's justice has a long way to go. One day that person will be brought to justice. But what if? I have to prepare for the worst. That way when the worst happens I won't be caught off guard. If I'm prepared, I won't be so afraid, right?" Shinjilia was silent again. After a moment he said, "Why didn't I realize that you were a pessimist? This is called nipping the problem in the bud. You're worrying for nothing, worrying about nothing." Yi Chanshan wanted to say something else, but Shinjilia quickly covered her mouth and said, "All right, that's enough. Let's go to sleep, shall we? We'll go make preparations early tomorrow and go back to record our statements." "Why do we have to record a statement? We're not the ones who did the bad things. This is a necessary procedure. We still have to find out what exactly our family has lost." Yi Chanshan was already sleepy. When she heard that, she felt even more exhausted. She closed her eyes. "I'll go to sleep then." He had thought that he would be unable to fall asleep for a long time like just now. She didn't know if Shinjilia's words had any effect on her, but the moment she closed her eyes, her mind went blank. Shinjilia breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the sound of even breathing. It was a good thing that she fell asleep, no matter when she fell asleep. Shinjilia closed his eyes and fell asleep with Yi Chanshan in his arms. Shinjilia rarely had dreams, especially nightmares. However, he dreamt of an extremely strange scene. They were on a cliff and in front of them was a mass of fog. Birds and eagles were chirping around them, and they could vaguely hear the flapping of birds' wings. Shinjilia stood on a high vantage point and looked around, but he was isolated and helpless. Wasn't he sleeping with Yi Chanshan in the hotel? How could he be here? Shinjilia panicked. "Where are you, Yi Chanshan?" However, after the echo reverberated in the surroundings, it disappeared. The eagle's cry grew louder and louder, and Shinjilia's sense of danger multiplied. Suddenly, an angry roar came from behind him. "Jilia, get your ass back here." Chapter 1872. Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat and he shouted, "Grandma!" However, there seemed to be no end to the abyss. Shinjilia didn't even hear the sound of falling. "Old Shin? Old Shin?" He vaguely heard Yi Chanshan's voice. Shinjilia turned around abruptly and saw Yi Chanshan. Yi Chanshan was standing at the edge of the cliff with a child in her hand. When Yi Chanshan saw Shinjilia, she smiled at him. Shinjilia lowered his head to look at the child beside him, and he couldn't help but look down as well. However, the child was wearing cute plaid suspenders and a white shirt. His small head was topped with a watermelon too long hair. He was short and cute. However, his face could not be seen clearly. His face seemed to be shrouded in a layer of fog, with a white glow that could easily confuse one's vision. "Old Shin, go home and cook. I haven't eaten yet." Yi Chanshan replied. No one knew what Shinjilia was thinking. He looked at Yi Chanshan and said, "There's no rice at home." The expression on Yi Chanshan's face changed as she held the child's hand. Suddenly, she turned around in a fit of pique, pulled the child and pushed him down the cliff. Shinjilia was shocked. He rushed forward and shouted, "Yi Chanshan, what are you doing?" Yi Chanshan didn't say a word. She turned around and threw a punch at Shinjilia. Shinjilia shrank back. He felt something tighten around his ankle. It was as if someone was dragging him. When he looked down, he saw an old, withered and pale hand. Shinjilia was caught off guard and he was dragged to the ground. Shinjilia suddenly staggered and opened his eyes. When he came to his senses, he was covered in sweat. "Did you have a nightmare?" It was Yi Chanshan's voice. Shinjilia didn't come back to his senses. Once again he was frightened and turned his head around. Yi Chanshan was looking at him. She looked a little frightened. Her eyes were wide open and she was still in a state of shock. Shinjilya came back to his senses and let out a long sigh. Yi Chanshan reached out and touched his forehead. Her hand was covered in sweat. He flung his hand in disgust and said, "Dirty." Shinjilya looked around. It was dark. The curtains were not drawn, and the sky outside was already turning bright. It was almost dawn. Shinjilya lay on the bed. He turned his head to look at Yi Chanshan and asked, "You said that you had a strange dream last time. You dreamed that I lost the child. What did it look like exactly?" Yi Chanshan blinked her eyes and asked, "Did you dream about it too?" "Yes, it's very strange. I rarely dream, but when I do it's almost the same as yours." Shinjilya wiped the sweat from his forehead and sat up. He removed his wet pajamas and said, "Tell me, what did you dream about?" Yi Chanshan thought about it and frowned. After a long time she said, "How would I know? It's been so long. Who would remember it? What did you dream of just now?" "It's very strange. I feel like I dreamed a lot of things, but I only remember one thing. You lost the child? You're the one who lost the child." Shinjilya tapped her forehead. "Why did you lose the child? When did I? Bah, don't even think about blaming me." Shinjilya laughed out loud. "You finally understand how I felt at that time, don't you? Did you see the child's face?" Yi Chanshan suddenly asked. Shinjilya's smile faded and he shook his head gently. Chapter 1873. She rubbed the goosebumps on her arms and asked, "Do you think that God is trying to foretell us something?" Yi Chanshan felt her hair stand on end. She rubbed the goosebumps on her arms and asked, "Do you think that God is trying to tell us something?" "Bah." Shinjilya smiled helplessly. "I think it's possible that it's because you told me about it the last time. That's why I dreamed about it. As the saying goes, what you think in the day you dream at night. If that was the case, there was still a basis for it." "Is that so?" Yi Chanshan felt that it made sense. "Sai, how can you live a good life every day? Go to sleep. It's nothing." Shinjilya held her in his arms and said, "You can only have children when your body is well. Don't stay up late." "I didn't want to either." "Oh, old Shin, you scared me just now." Shinjilya raised his eyebrows and asked, "I was talking in my sleep too." Yi Chanshan curled up in his arms and said, "You keep calling me grandma and Yi Chanshan. I can't shake you awake no matter how hard I try." "Is it that exaggerated?" Shinjilya thought it was funny and he began to think about it. He had always been a light sleeper and he didn't expect that there would be a time like this. "Yeah." Yi Chanshan nodded her head profusely. "You have no idea how many times I called out to you, but you wouldn't wake up no matter how hard I pinched you." "What did you call me?" Yi Chanshan was a little confused and couldn't react in time. "You said you called me a few times. What did you call me?" "Old Shin," Yi Chanshan said matter-of-factly. "That's what I've always called you." Shinjilya nodded his head and replied, "Yes, I understand. In psychology, these are all explainable. There is a popular saying that it is psychological. Coupled with the influence of the environment, dreaming is very normal." "What do you mean?" "To put it simply, I'm dreaming because I'm infected by you." *CK, how can this be?" "Humph, that's how it is." Shinjilya hugged her and pressed her head. "Sleep." "Oh, all right." Not long after Yi Chanshan closed her eyes, her cell phone, which was charging on the bedside table, suddenly rang. It was Shinjilya's phone. It was an unknown number with a Kingstown landline number. When Yi Chanshan saw it, she asked, "Is it that cop again?" Shinjilya didn't think it was possible. He took a look and said, "It's probably a harassment call." He pressed the silent button on his phone and put it back. But after a while, after the call was automatically hung up, the phone rang again. It was the same phone call. "Answer it." "What if it's something important?" Yi Chanshan asked. Shinjilya looked at the time. It was barely 5 in the morning. Picking up the phone, he could hear the howling of the wind on the other side. "Hello," Shinjilya replied. Suddenly, a laugh came from the other side of the phone. It was a strange voice. "I'm not very good, Dr. Shin. Since you dare to call the police, I can only give you a big gift." Shinjilya had turned on the loudspeaker, so Yi Chanshan could hear him clearly. Yi Chanshan's heart skipped a beat, and she began to tremble in fear. Just as she was about to speak, Shinjilya covered her mouth. Shinjilya used his eyes to warn her to be quiet and asked in a calm voice, "What do you want?" Chapter 1874. You want money? Shinjilya asked directly. But in his heart, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. If this person dared to contact him, there was a way to catch him. What he was most afraid of was that if he didn't come, it would cause panic. Ha ha ha, I'm not stupid. If I wanted money, wouldn't you wait for someone to come and catch me? The man laughed. His voice was hoarse and unpleasant, like a stone scraping the sand. Then what do you want? I want powder. Without a doubt, the powder was referring to drugs. I don't have such things, Shinjilya said righteously. If you want money, I can give it to you as long as you don't pester us in the future. But if you want powder, you have to get it yourself. I don't have such connections. You don't? The man seemed to sigh. His throat seemed to be broken. Then I'll have to go after your girlfriend, Dr. Shin. Shinjilya's brows were tightly knitted together. When he heard that, he sneered and said, Do you even have the chance? The man seemed to be quiet for a moment. I'm with my girlfriend every day. If you want to do anything, you have to go through me. I have police protection around me. Who do you think you are? There was a hint of provocation in his words. Yi Chanshan was frightened when she heard that. She gently tugged at Shinjilya. There was an indescribable nervousness in her eyes. Shinjilya shook his head gently and gestured for her to calm down. The man chuckled, but before he could speak, Shinjilya spoke again. When the time comes, we'll have to see if you can endure it or if I can. Since you're calling me now, it means that you're at the end of your rope. There are wanted posters everywhere, and your photo has already been published. You're already starting to feel nervous. You can only turn to me for help now if you don't want to suffer so much. An addict was undoubtedly terrifying. But what was even more terrifying was an addict who had no other way out. To catch a snake at its weakest point, Shinjilya's every word hit the nail on the head. No wonder you're a psychiatrist. You're right. But I have to warn you, if I don't want to live anymore, I can easily kill one or two of you. Bring it on any time. Shinjilya's tone seemed very relaxed, but Yi Chanshan could clearly see his tightly knitted brows. His heartbeat quickened uncontrollably. Yi Chanshan grabbed Shinjilya's hand and didn't dare to make a sound. As long as you can endure it, believe it or not, as soon as you go out, people will recognize you everywhere. At that time, you won't even be able to eat, let alone make the powder. Are you threatening me? We wouldn't dare. Our lives are still in your hands. Hee hee. Zhang Xian chuckled coldly. His laughter was filled with obvious anger. You sure have guts. I'm not as old as you. Do you really think that no one is monitoring our phones and waiting for your call? How dare you? The man's voice was filled with anger and panic. Shinjilya laughed. What's there to be afraid of? It's just a joke. Yi Chanshan was scared out of her wits. Her body was trembling. She almost thought that what he said was true. She hadn't even been able to relax when she heard the bad news. The upheaval in her mood made Yi Chanshan feel terrible. The person on the other side of the phone was also flustered and exasperated. He roared, Bastard. Shinjilya didn't respond and waited for him to continue. Chapter 1875. The warning voice, coupled with the whistling sound of the wind coming from the other side of the phone, was indescribably terrifying. Shinjilya wasn't frightened. He teased, My woman will go? His voice seemed to be chuckling. The man hadn't expected Shinjilya to have such an attitude. For a moment he didn't know what he meant. Shinjilya's tone was unhurried as he said, My woman is timid. If she's not careful, she might call the police or something. Or she might accidentally give you up. Do you think you're the one at a disadvantage, or am I? What do you want? I'll go. You said it yourself. I'm bold. Tiske. The man looked disdainful. If I find out you're up to no good, I won't let you off. All right, I'll wait and see. With that, Shinjilya hung up the phone. Yi Chanshan was right beside him. She knew very well that he wasn't as relaxed as he made it sound. When he put down the phone, Shinjilya's palms were already covered in a layer of sweat. There were also beads of sweat on his forehead. Hot tears welled up in Yi Chanshan's eyes as she asked, Old Shin, are you really going? Yes, I'm going. Shinjilya nodded slightly and kissed Yi Chanshan on the forehead. Don't be afraid. It'll be fine. How can I not be afraid? Yi Chanshan burst into tears and hugged Shinjilya's waist. You scared me to death. How can you act so well? You're obviously very nervous, but you still speak as if nothing happened. It's like you're suffering from schizophrenia. Shinjilya couldn't help but laugh. He nodded at her head and said, What kind of description is that? Do you sound like you're praising me? Yeah. Yi Chanshan's face was already wet with tears. She wiped her eyes hard and sobbed. Why don't I go? If a woman goes alone, he might let his guard down. No. Shinjilia's attitude was very firm. I'll go. You saw it for yourself. I can act. Can you? Yi Chanshan was speechless. She couldn't. She couldn't at all. Her mental fortitude was obviously not as good as Shinjilia's. She might be paralyzed when she arrived at the scene. Shinjilia looked at her and suddenly turned to face her. He held her face in his hands and kissed her on the lips. Yi Chanshan felt even more afraid. Her breathing became heavier. She pushed him away and cried out, No. Don't go. Yi Chanshan was shocked. Shinjilia was caught off guard by her push, and his hands went to the back of his head. Don't go. She curled into a ball helplessly and said, I'm so scared. I think we're going to get into trouble. Old Shin, can you not go? Shinjilia hugged her and comforted her softly. It's okay. It's okay. We're just going to buy something. Don't be afraid. Old Shin. Yi Chanshan suddenly looked up. Her face was wet. Do you love me? Shinjilia looked at Yi Chanshan and said with certainty, Yes, Yi Chanshan. I love you very, very much, so I can't lose you. Don't be afraid. I'll be fine. Yi Chanshan sniffled and threw herself into his arms. She tried to calm herself down, but it was useless. Her tears flowed uncontrollably. She whimpered, What should I do, Shinjilia? I love you very, very much too, but don't go. I beg you, don't go. Shinjilia didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. Chapter 1876. How can I possibly fall asleep now? Yi Chanshan was about to go crazy. She grabbed Shinjilia and said, Old Shin, don't worry about this. I think he's been bullying us because we give him the impression that we're easy targets. As long as we're not afraid of him, he won't be able to do anything to us. You, Chanshan? Shinjilia interrupted her. Yi Chanshan's frightened eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Shinjilia with confusion and helplessness. Shinjilia comforted her and said, It'll be fine. But, no buts. Shinjilia gently patted her on the back. My grandmother said that I'll definitely live to be 100 years old. Your grandmother can be very unreliable at times. Yi Chanshan retorted reflexively. Shinjilia sighed heavily. What do you want me to do with you? You refuse to believe my grandmother's good words. Instead, you believe the bad ones without a doubt. I didn't? You didn't? Think about it carefully. Did you? Yi Chanshan was speechless. Shinjilia looked at her and said, It'll be fine. I'll call the police to inform them. Call the police? Yi Chanshan was shocked. If that person finds out, won't he take revenge on us? He'll take revenge on us even if we don't call the police. Shinjilia stared at her. Don't believe the words of that kind of person. If he dares to do anything to us, it's only a matter of time. We'll call the police to nip it in the bud. However, if we want to arrest him, we'll have to catch him like a turtle in a jar. What are you thinking? Yi Chanshan felt even more uneasy. Shinjilia glanced at her and didn't answer. After calling Officer Lin, Shinjilia and Yi Chanshan soon met up with them. It was 6 o'clock in the morning and Kong Cheng was still asleep. Officer Lin had been busy with work and hadn't slept all night. Shinjilia and Yi Chanshan were the same. After sending someone to buy breakfast, Officer Lin brought them to a secluded room in the station. Officer Lin, I need your cooperation. Officer Lin glanced at Yi Chanshan, who was obviously frightened, and nodded. Tell me what happened. I'll make the arrangements later. I don't need it today. Just take care of her for me. Shinjilia glanced at Yi Chanshan. I'll go there myself. I'm guessing this person wants to meet me twice. We can do this. Yi Chanshan finished her breakfast as if she was chewing wax. Shinjilia coaxed her to sleep on the sofa in the police station. With her head resting on Shinjilia's lap, Yi Chanshan quickly fell asleep. By the time he woke up, it was already noon. Yi Chanshan stood up abruptly and walked out. There were many people in uniform outside. When the police officers saw Yi Chanshan, they were obviously a little surprised. Yi Chanshan shouted, Shinjilia. Such a voice attracted the attention of many people. A policewoman walked up and said, He went out to buy lunch for the time being. Don't worry. Yi Chanshan breathed a sigh of relief and asked, How long has he been gone? Just now. Let me tell you when you wake up. What about Officer Lin? Yi Chanshan felt that something was amiss. The policewoman was stunned for a moment and quickly replied, He's off duty. Yi Chanshan's heart sank. She turned around and went back into the room to wait for Shinjilia to return. But the wait went on for an hour. Chapter 1877. Yi Qianshan couldn't help but look at the policewoman. Where did he go? The policewoman couldn't answer. She looked at Yi Qianshan and smiled. Yi Qianshan's heart suddenly sank. Kingstown was an old city. Streets and alleys intersected, and there were all kinds of small roads in the urban villages. There was a small road on one of the old streets called Songyin South Street. Shinjilia followed the GPS and walked over. He searched for a while and saw a chess stall. A few white-haired old men were sitting there with a big parasol on top. Beside them were old people riding bicycles. The 5 old men looked to be in their 50s or 60s. One of them was wearing a sweatshirt and holding a fan. His legs were spread apart and he was enjoying the cool air. Another was playing chess. "Pa, I'll eat you." The old man's old and energetic voice was filled with excitement and laughter. Shinjilia walked up to take a look. He looked at one of the old men and said softly, "Business." The old man's smile froze. He turned to look at Shinjilia and sized him up. Shinjilia's lips were red and his face was pale. Although there were some dark circles under his eyes, it wasn't to the extent that he was doing business. He didn't think it was a business. The old man pretended not to know and asked, "What's that?" "Business?" Shinjilia repeated. Shinjilia repeated himself. He picked up his phone and opened WeChat. He sent a message to a new friend he had just added. Soon a call came in. Shinjilia picked up the phone and handed it to the old man. The criminal was obviously very familiar with the old man. The old man sized him up and said something over the phone. After a series of and "s," the old man tapped the phone with his fan and typed a few words on WeChat before returning the phone to Shinjilia. Shinjilia understood. He put the phone in his pocket and walked in step by step. There were many people inside and there were children running and playing at the entrance. Shinjilia walked in and saw a child. He asked, "Little boy, are there any adults here?" The child wasn't afraid of strangers. He smiled and pointed behind him. Shinjilia walked in and saw an open door. Shinjilia strode in. A middle-aged woman who looked to be in her 30s or 40s had dark skin and her hair was tied up. She looked Shinjilia up and down and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Business," Shinjilia repeated. The woman asked, "Who wants it?" Shinjilia took out his phone and showed her his WeChat. On WeChat was the page that the old man had just sent. The woman took a look and said, 5,000. Shinjilia had no concept of that, but he did bring a lot of money with him. Hearing this, he took out the money, counted 5,000 yuan and handed it to her. After the woman verified its authenticity, she took out a small white bag the size of 2 fingers from the interlayer of the table. "That's it." Shinjilia looked at it and frowned. The woman sneered, "Is this your first time buying? You'll get used to it after a few more times. Get lost and be careful on your way." Why is his attitude so bad? Shinjilia still didn't say a word. He put the things in his pocket and walked out. Before he left the alley, he received another call from an unknown number. It was another landline. That person was looking for a landline to call him. Shinjilia was already used to it. When he answered the call, he heard the unpleasant voice on the other end. "Come out. I'm coming out." Chapter 1878. Shinjilia did as he was told. When he walked out, he saw the group of old men. Those people glanced at Shinjilia in unison and then ignored him. Shinjilia walked to the left. After looking around, he quickened his pace. His heart tightened. This person probably wanted to settle things in one go. Shinjilia didn't hang up. He asked, "Are you here to get something?" "Why are you asking that? Just keep walking." Shinjilia lowered his head and kept walking. "Turn right." An unpleasant, hoarse voice commanded Shinjilia to go in that direction. Shinjilia had already guessed that the person must be nearby and watching him. But where was he? He looked around but didn't find anything strange. "What are you looking at?" "Turn right." Shinjilia did as he was told. He narrowed his eyes and thought, "This guy must be somewhere high up." He raised his head and looked around. Nothing. However, there was a building that used reflective glass. It was a small villa. "Don't tell me it's in here?" "Turn left." The unpleasant voice came again. Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat. Not only did he not turn left, but he dodged to the right. The man was angry and said, "I told you to turn left. Where are you going?" Shinjilia walked even faster and said, "If you want something, come and get it from me." The man was exasperated. In a moment, Shinjilia could clearly hear the sound of something smashing coming from the other side of the phone. Damn it, you're asking for it. Believe it or not, I'll kill your woman. You'll have to have the chance first, Shinjilia snorted. You're the first person I've ever met to be so arrogant when you're asking for help. There was no sound coming from the other side. Shinjilia could clearly hear the wind whistling and the sound of friction. There was no doubt that the man had started to run. Shinjilia's heart sank. After a few turns, he came to a small alley where there was a small grocery store. He asked for a bottle of white wine and a lighter. He left $100 on the counter and quickly moved forward. Shinjilia opened the bottle as he walked. His footsteps were fast. Behind him, he heard the sound of rapid footsteps. Shinjilia heard it clearly. He jumped to the side and whipped his head around. However, it was the girl from the convenience store. The young lady was taken aback by Shinjilia's sudden outburst and replied sheepishly, "Give me my change, no need." Shinjilia turned around and looked as if he was about to run. The young lady felt that he was a little strange. It's a few dozen yuan and he doesn't want it anymore? It was as if he was running for his life. As he muttered to himself, a black shadow dashed out from behind him. His face was ferocious and he looked a little scary. The little girl was startled and ran to the side. The figure didn't pay any attention to her and continued to charge straight at Shinjilia. When Shinjilia heard the voice behind him, his heart sank and he ran even faster. "Stop right there." A hoarse and unpleasant voice rang out. With a bottle of white wine in his arms, Shinjilia gritted his teeth and ran toward the intersection. "I told you to stop." When he heard the footsteps behind him, Shinjilia cursed under his breath, "Idiot." A very low-level person, a cornered drug addict. He had actually been frightened by such a person for an entire night? Shinjilia ran to the intersection in a few steps. He turned around abruptly, opened the lid of the bottle of white wine and splashed it forward. Chapter 1879. The man hadn't expected such a thing to happen. He took a step back in fright. Then he was hit by the fire. "Ah!" The man screamed, but he didn't forget his original intention. He lunged at Shinjilia. Shinjilia dodged and kicked him. Then he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. The criminal was surrounded. He could clearly hear the sound of guns being loaded. With a horrified expression, the drug addict fell to the ground. He put out the fire on his body, but his head was pressed against the gun. He stared at Shinjilia with hatred and gritted his teeth. King played me? Shinjilia was already covered in sweat. When he heard that, he laughed coldly. But his heart was indescribably relaxed. South Songyun Street was swept. A total of 15 people were arrested. It was already afternoon when he returned to the police station. Before Shinjilia entered, he could already hear Yi Chanchan's footsteps in the distance. When she saw Shinjilia, Yi Chanchan burst into tears. She lunged at him and cried without holding back. Officer Lin saw it and found it funny. His heart ached. He patted Shinjilia on the shoulder and said, "Your girlfriend was scared. Comfort her." Shinjilia's heart softened. He hugged Yi Chanchan tighter and said softly, "It's okay. Don't cry. There are so many people watching." Yi Chanchan felt even more wronged. She bit his shoulder. Shinjilia cried out in pain and said, "It's over. It's over. Are you trying to murder your husband?" Yi Chanchan bit him even harder. After sobbing a few times, she pushed him away and strode out of the police station. Shinjilia saw that something was wrong. He quickly chased after her and comforted her. "I've caught that person. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Are you surprised? Are you touched?" Yi Chanchan's mouth twitched. She cried again. Shinjilia was frightened. He quickly hugged her and comforted her. All right. Don't cry. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was really wrong." Yi Chanchan hugged him and sobbed angrily. "Why didn't you tell me that you were going to die? If I woke up to the news that you were killed by someone on the side of the road, what would I do in the future?" "I'm fine, aren't I?" Shinjilia said helplessly. "Besides, how can you curse your boyfriend like that?" All right, stop crying." Yi Chanchan didn't want to cry either, but the grievances were overwhelming. Her eyes were swollen like 2 walnuts and she couldn't stop crying. Shinjilia felt helpless and said softly, "Shall we go home first?" "No, I'm going to a hotel." Shinjilia laughed and pulled her along. "Let's go." Yi Chanchan felt that it was the longest 2 days of her life. After these 2 days, he became especially happy at other times. After staying in the hotel for a few days, they started to move. The small house was listed as a second-hand house. Yi Chanshan and Shinjilia moved all their belongings to their new home. The police officers presented Shinjilia with a silk banner. On it were 2 rows of words: Courageous Good Samaritan, Outstanding Citizen. The words were pompous and simple. Yi Chanshan threw it under the bed in disgust. When Shinjilia asked about it, Yi Chanshan replied with 2 words: throw it away. Shinjilia was helpless. After the matter was settled, the people in the capital started to give him bad news. Chapter 1880. Shinjilia was stunned when he heard the news. He rubbed his nose awkwardly. When he turned to look at Yi Chanshan, he saw the woman laughing heartily. I see. Shinjilia spoke to his colleague on the phone and sighed. It's my fault. It's my fault. Tell the director that I'll go back once I'm done here. When his colleague heard that, he flew into a rage and said, You rascal, do you know how many things have been going on in the hospital recently? You haven't even F***king finished dealing with them. I haven't even F***king waited for you to F***king finish dealing with those trivial matters on your side, and all of us will be done for. Do you know how busy we've been lately? The speaker was on, and Shinjilia could almost hear the saliva on the other end of the line. After a moment of silence, he said, You should at least give me some time. The director said that if you don't come back soon, he'll deduct all your bonuses. You'll lose your promotion bonus and your year-end bonus. I don't care if you're a relative of the royal family. It's useless to ask your father for help. What a vicious statement. The total sum of the bonuses was not a small figure. Shinjilia couldn't stand it anymore. Hey. You can't be so unkind. I still have a wife and child to support. Yi Chanshan sat up and threw a pillow at him. Shinjilia caught it firmly. The other end of the line was silent. After a long time he said, So what if you're in a relationship? I'll tell the director to deduct all your bonuses. The call had already been hung up. Shinjilia had no choice but to turn to look at Yi Chanshan, who was sitting on the bed. He threw the phone aside and pounced on her. How dare you laugh at me? Yi Chanshan screamed and shrank back. Then, she let out a peal of laughter that was loud enough to pierce through the ceiling. It tickles. Shinjilia's hands groped her body and pressed down hard. He snorted and said, You deserve to be punished. Yi Chanshan groaned. She was soon out of breath from the punishment. The swaying of the bed became more and more joyful as time passed. When he returned to the capital, Shinjilia dealt with all the work that had been delayed. Fortunately, the old director was kind enough. Although he had been demoted, there was still a mountain of work to be done. In the words of his colleagues, You deserve it. Shinjilia had no choice but to bitterly finish his work during the day. When he got home at night, he called his girlfriend to complain. To Shinjilia's surprise, not only was his year-end bonus not deducted, but it was also increased by quite a bit. After receiving the reward, Shinjilia glanced at the old director. Amos snorted. If you bring your girlfriend to the imperial capital and run off to Connecticut to work again, I'll fire you. Shinjilia laughed out loud and half-heartedly gave a military salute. Yes, sir. 4 months was neither a long time nor a short time. The weather turned cold and the nights in the capital grew longer. The end of the year was approaching. 2 days before the holidays, Shinjilia made a special trip to Kingstown. After that, he went to Yuntown with Yi Chanshan. The weather in Yuntown was quite warm. When they arrived, Yi Jinhua was wearing a cotton-padded jacket and sitting in the living room, watching TV and drinking tea. Dad. Yi Chanshan called out as she dragged her luggage into the room. Uncle. Shinjilia exhaled a breath of cold air, but his smile was bright. Happy New Year. Chapter 1881. Yi Chanshan took off her scarf and stuck out her tongue when she heard that. How did you know? I'm your father. Although he said that, he still took the things from her hand and said, Have a cup of tea. It's freshly brewed. He covered Yi Chanshan's hand and frowned. But it's cold. Why didn't you wear more? I wore more. Look at how swollen I am. Yi Chanshan raised her hand. Sure enough, it was swollen. Yi Jinhua frowned and handed her a cup of tea. Drink it. It'll warm you up. Yi Chanshan took it and drank it in one gulp. It's delicious. She turned to look at Shinjilia and picked up another cup. You drink it too. Shinjilia took it and drank it in one gulp. Good tea. Yi Chanshan smiled and put the cup down. Yi Jinhua was unhappy and said with a sour tone, A grown girl can't be kept at home. She doesn't even treat your father that well. Hey Dad, didn't you just drink it? Yi Chanshan asked Yi Jinhua to sit down. Sit down. We're going out to eat today. Don't cook for yourself. It's such a cold day. Humph. Yi Zhenhua glanced at Yi Qianqian and then looked at Xinjilia. When do you plan to get married? Xinjilia touched his nose and said, It'll probably be a while. We didn't do it before. We'll have to wait until Qianqian is 28. Yi Qianqian rarely communicated with her father, so they didn't tell Yi Zhenhua about her fortune-telling with the blind uncle. Naturally, he didn't know about it. Yi Zhenhua wasn't surprised when he heard that. He nodded and said, It's good that your relationship is good. Don't be together for so many years. You won't be able to wait until Qianqian is 28. Yi Qianqian was unhappy when she heard that. She rebuked, Dad, are you cursing me? Yi Zhenhua stood up and looked at the time. It's getting late. If we're going out to eat, let's hurry. It'll be even colder when it rains. The weather in Yuntown hadn't been good recently. When they heard that, they didn't waste any more time. They grabbed their bags and headed out. Yi Zhenhua had ordered all of Yi Qianqian's favorites. In the end, she symbolically waved the menu in front of Xinjilia as a sign of asking for his opinion. Yi Qianqian wanted to laugh, but she shrank back when Yi Zhenhua glared at her. Yi Zhenhua had the habit of making tea after a meal. After dinner, he returned home, boiled a pot of water and sat in front of the tea tray. Shin, come and sit for a while. Xinjilia didn't know what to do at first. When he heard this, he walked over and sat down in front of Yi Zhenhua. Yi Zhenhua skillfully washed and brewed the tea. His movements were smooth and graceful. He glanced at Xinjilia and asked, Shin, does your family not like our Qianqian very much? Xinjilia glanced at Yi Qianqian when he heard that. When Yi Qianqian heard that, she moved a stool over and sat down. Yi Zhenhua snorted and looked at his daughter. What are you doing? I wanted to drink some tea. Yi Qianqian found a random excuse and picked up a cup of tea. She almost scalded herself. Don't be so rash, Yi Zhenhua rebuked her, but he still took the cup from her. Drink it when it's cold. As he spoke, he looked at Xinjilia and asked, Does your grandmother not like our Qianqian very much? Chapter 1882. Yi Zhenhua sipped his tea and said slowly, I know that you suffered at your hands before. As he spoke, he glanced at Xinjilia. I heard that the old lady in your family treats my Yuyu very badly. I don't expect her to treat my Qianqian very well. However, you'd better protect my little girl. In the past, I was always worried that she couldn't find a partner. Now, I'm worried that she'll be bullied by your family. He sighed and looked at Yi Qianqian. Exasperated with her failure to live up to his expectations, he said, Can't you just let me worry a little less? Yi Qianqian felt a little wronged and replied, You're the one who's worried. What does that have to do with me? Yi Zhenhua glared at her, but his face was full of helplessness. Sigh. Don't worry, uncle. Xinjilia looked at Yi Zhenhua and said seriously, No matter what, taking good care of Qianqian is my first duty. I'll take care of my grandmother. Even if Qianqian can't marry me now, I can wait. It's only a year or so. After that, we'll spend the rest of our lives together. Between us, it doesn't matter whether we have this certificate or not. Yi Qianqian nodded her head in approval. When Yi Zhenhua heard this, he didn't know what to feel. He snorted and said, You better be telling the truth. If you dare to bully my daughter, I'll go to the capital with a knife and chop you up. Xinjilia grinned, revealing his rosy lips and pearly white teeth. Then you won't get the chance. You have a sharp tongue. Although Yi Zhenhua said so, a smile bloomed on his face. He seemed to be in a good mood. After chatting with the elders in the living room, Yi Zhenhua soon felt sleepy. After they left, the weather was a little cold, and Yi Qianqian didn't feel like showering. She took off her coat and lay on the bed, refusing to get up. The two of them had been separated for 4 to 5 months, and Xinjilia had been busy in the capital. The feeling of a long-distance relationship was really not a good one. More importantly, Xinjilia had gone to fetch Yi Qianqian from Kingstown to Yuntown the moment he landed. He hadn't had the time to be affectionate with her. Now that the trip was over, Xinjilia couldn't help but start groping her. Yi Qianqian twisted and whispered, The soundproofing here is terrible. Don't touch me. It's okay, I'll be gentle. Bah, we'll talk about it tomorrow. What's the rush? Yi Qianqian kicked him away and hugged herself tightly. She refused to let go. Xinjilia was actually a little hesitant, but when he thought about how he had to leave a good impression on his future father-in-law, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But who would have thought that clenching his teeth like that would cause him to be unable to sleep for the entire night? When Xinjilia woke up the next day, he looked dispirited and listless. When Yi Chanchan saw that, she lowered her head and pretended not to know anything. After eating the breakfast prepared by Yi Zhenhua, Yi Chanchan suddenly had the sudden urge to visit Fang Tongtong. Shenjilia knew that Yi Chanchan couldn't let it go, so he didn't stop her. However, when they arrived at Fang Tongtong's shop, they realized that the shopkeeper was Fang Tongtong's mother. When Fang Tongtong's mother saw Yi Chanchan and Shenjilia, she felt a little conflicted. "You're back." Yi Chanchan nodded her head and looked inside before asking, "Where's Tong Tong?" Tong Tong went to Thailand for a vacation. As she spoke, she took out a stool from inside. Sit for a while." Chapter 1883. Oh. Mrs. Fang nodded and looked at Yi Chanchan and Shenjilia. There were a few emotions in her eyes that Yi Chanchan couldn't understand. After staring at them for a while, Mrs. Fang smiled and said, "Thank you, Chanchan." Yi Chanchan was stunned. "Thank you for being willing to come and see our Tong Tong." Mrs. Fang looked at Yi Chanchan. Although she was smiling, her eyes were already red. "Some time ago I was the one who spread those rumors. I know that our Tong Tong likes your boyfriend." Mrs. Fang spoke in a dialect so Shenjilia didn't really understand. But seeing their reactions, he could almost imagine that they were talking about him. Yi Chanchan didn't answer and just looked at her. Mrs. Fang forced a smile and said, "So, I wanted to ruin your relationship and exaggerate the matter a little. Then everyone in town would know that Tong Tong was bullied by you." Yi Chanchan was silent and didn't say anything. "But I didn't expect that my daughter would be defiled by that beast." When the court heard the verdict, they said that the man was mentally ill and couldn't be sentenced. They just locked him up in a mental hospital, but he drove my daughter crazy. Mrs. Fang cried out and looked at Yi Chanchan. In the first month, Tong Tong almost committed suicide. Yi Chanchan was stunned. She didn't know about this at all. "Fortunately, I found out in time. Otherwise, I might have lost my daughter." Mrs. Fang wiped her tears and sobbed as she said, "I know I went overboard in the past, but Tong Tong has already been bullied so badly. She didn't have many friends since she was young, and she has always treated you as her best friend. You know how she and I have treated you all these years. During this period of time, Tong Tong has always been very regretful. She thinks that you are still her good friend, but she doesn't have the face to look for you. I beg you, Chanchan, forgive our Tong Tong, okay?" Yi Chanchan didn't say anything. She took out a tissue from her bag and handed it to her. Mrs. Fang took it and looked at Yi Chanchan, then at Shenjilia. "Your boyfriend is really good. I know that Tong Tong was just momentarily possessed. Chanchan, don't be calculative with her, okay?" Yi Chanchan had never been a cold-hearted person. Seeing an elder cry like this in front of her, her heart was like a cup of tea that had been steeped for a long time, and it was suffused with bitterness. "I understand," Yi Chanchan whispered. He stretched out his hand to wipe away her tears, feeling a little sorry for her. Fang Tong Tong wasn't a bad person. Yi Chanchan knew better than anyone else. Hearing this, Mrs. Fang raised her head and tears rolled down her cheeks again. She nodded and said, "Chanchan, that's great. Chanchan, it's the new year. Can you give Tong Tong a call?" After that, Mrs. Fang seemed to realize that her request might be a little too much, so she awkwardly added, "It's the new year and she's alone in Thailand. I'm a little worried. If you don't want to call her, that's fine too. All right, don't cry," Yi Chanchan said softly. "It's the new year. Be happy." Mrs. Fang smiled happily and nodded. Yi Chanchan was not in a good mood, but at the same time she was in a good mood. Chapter 1884. After all, they had been friends for so many years and Fang Tong Tong had encountered such an incident. However, he still felt that something was wrong. Mrs. Fang's words might have given her a legitimate reason. Although Shenjilia didn't understand what they were saying, he could roughly guess what they were talking about. On the way to the airport, he saw Yi Chanchan staring at her cell phone in a daze. He sighed softly and said, "If you want a call, just do it." Yi Chanchan glanced at Shenjilia and suddenly felt a little sad. Shenjilia hated Fang Tong Tong so much, yet he allowed her to make a phone call? It would take them more than 10 minutes to reach the airport. Yi Chanchan thought for a moment and dialed Fang Tong Tong's number. It rang for a while before the call was picked up. "Hello, Chanchan?" It was Fang Tong Tong's voice. However, compared to his previous flamboyant and enthusiastic voice, his voice now seemed a little cautious. It seemed to be a test, as if he didn't dare to believe it. She then said, "Tong Tong, Happy New Year." Fang Tong Tong had been in Thailand for a few days. Intermittently, a few people came to wish her Happy New Year. However, no one could say such a simple blessing to make her feel so moved to tears. Fong Tong Tong felt a lump in her throat. For a long time she was unable to speak. Hearing the silence on the other side after a long time, he finally said, "You too." Fong Tong Tong did not say anything else, but in that instant, a smile spread across her lips. How nice. She hung up the phone and looked out the window. It was drizzling outside. The weather this year was not good and it was wet everywhere. However, his mood was inexplicably better. Shinjilia glanced at her, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. It was already evening when they arrived at the imperial capital. Mrs. Shun had been waiting outside the departure lounge for a long time. When she saw Shinjilia and Yi Chanshan walking out chatting and laughing, a smile blossomed on her face. She rushed forward to Yi Chanshan's side and said, "Chanshan, you're finally here again. Auntie missed you so much." Yi Chanshan was a little embarrassed and called out, "Auntie, did he tell you that I was coming today?" He was, of course, referring to Shinjilia. Of course, this was a matter of course. Mrs. Shun smiled and said, "Yes, he suddenly applied for leave and went to Kingstown. I guess that he must be with you. After asking around, I found out that he was indeed coming back. That's why I thought that he must be picking you up. Don't feel pressured. I just miss you and want to talk to you." She looked around and asked, "Are you the only one here?" "That's right." Yi Chanshan was a little flattered. No, your uncle is here." Mrs. Shun looked around and finally found Shin Longyue in the crowd. There he is. Shin Longyue was on the phone from behind. He walked over while talking on the phone. He wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses and had a smile on his face. He looked quite kind. Yi Chanshan felt a little nervous. She turned around and gave Shinjilia a reproachful look. "Didn't we agree to come secretly? Didn't he say that he would let her prepare herself and that his family would give her a heads up before she went over to their house to give her New Year greetings?" This was different from what they had agreed on. Shinjilia felt a little innocent and said, "I didn't know either." "I'm innocent too." Yi Chanshan had the urge to slap him to death. She felt increasingly nervous. Chapter 1885. She had already been caught by her parents. How could she sneak into a hotel? Yi Chanshan reluctantly allowed herself to be dragged into the car. Then she reluctantly followed them to the Shin residence. However, no matter how reluctant Yi Chanshan was, she had to put on a cheerful expression. The weather in the capital was very cold. The surrounding flowers, trees and other greenery were all bare. Ice that had yet to melt hung from the branches. Even with festive lanterns hung, it still felt very monotonous. It was cold. Unlike the damp and cold in the south, the capital was so cold that it made one's mouth dry. Fortunately, there was a heater in the car, so Yi Chanshan was able to sit comfortably. As soon as she arrived at the Shin residence, she saw old Mrs. Shun sitting inside as expected. Old Mrs. Shun was twirling a prayer bead in her hand. The bead was engraved with complicated Sanskrit characters. She was dressed in 2 black qipao dresses with dark red embroidery. Her short white hair fell past her ears. When she saw Yi Chanshan, she couldn't help but take a second look. "You're back." Old Mrs. Shun sat on the sofa without moving. She glanced at Shinjilia and said, "You only know how to scare people away. You just went to Kingstown yesterday and you're back today. I thought you were going to spend the New Year in Kingstown." Shinjilia dragged his luggage and said with a smile, "How could I? I still want to spend the New Year with Grandma." "I'm afraid it's not just me?" Old Mrs. Shun glanced at Yi Chanshan meaningfully. Yi Chanshan felt a little awkward and greeted, "Hello, Grandma. Happy New Year." "Happy New Year to you too. Nanny, he, go and prepare a guest room for her." Nanny, he was a little embarrassed. She looked at Shinjilia meaning to ask for his opinion. Shinjilia replied, "What's the point? Just sleep with me." No. Yi Chanshan felt even more awkward. "Let's just sleep in the guest room. Otherwise I can go and stay in a hotel." "What hotel?" Old Mrs. Shun's attitude was a little arrogant. She glanced at Yi Chanshan and said, "Those who don't know might think that I'm mistreating my grandson's girlfriend." Yi Chanshan was speechless. She laughed dryly, feeling extremely awkward. When Shinjilia saw that, he was a little displeased and said, "Grandma, why do you have such unpleasant words on the New Year? Do you want your grandma to speak nicely?" Old Mrs. Shun looked at Shinjilia with a look of disdain. "It's not like you don't know your grandmother. Are you dreaming?" Shinjilia found her completely unreasonable. Nanny, he quietly carried Yi Chanshan's luggage to the guest room and said, In that case, Miss Yi, let me help you pack. Yi Chanshan quickly waved her hands and said, I think it's better if I do it myself. You go ahead with your work. I can handle such a small matter on my own. Old Mrs. Shun glanced at Yi Chanshan. Her attitude softened a little. He twirled the prayer beads in his hand and didn't say a word. When Shinjilia saw that, he walked up and said, I'll pack up with you. Let's go. He followed Yi Chanshan to the guest room, and Shinjilia closed the door behind him. As soon as Yi Chanshan entered, she tried to listen to the sounds outside. Yi Chanshan didn't know if it was because no one was talking outside, or if it was because the soundproofing inside was really good, but she couldn't hear a single word. Chapter 1886. Shinjilia felt wronged. He grabbed Yi Chanshan's hand and said, I didn't say that. They probably found out about my flight number and came to pick us up. They just didn't want you to stay in a hotel. What else could I do? Yi Chanshan was a little angry. But it was their freedom to do what they wanted. What was the point of being angry? Shinjilia looked at Yi Chanshan and said, Don't be angry. Instead of using this time, you should think about how to deal with grandmother. How else can I deal with her? I don't even have a temper. Shinjilia laughed and said, But I'm a little embarrassed too. Why are you embarrassed? You're not the little wife. Do you remember the last time? What last time? Yi Chanshan glared at him. The last time you came to our house, grandmother threw a tantrum and said that you couldn't get pregnant. Didn't I make up a lie in a moment of desperation? Yi Chanshan suddenly remembered, and her face immediately turned red. She looked at Shinjilia with wide eyes and said, Yes, you said I was pregnant the last time. Now what about pregnancy? Yi Chanshan looked at her flat belly and felt so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. No wonder. I felt that grandmother had been looking at me, and so had Nanny He. Was weird. I didn't expect it. Sob so embarrassing. Shinjilia saw her expression and couldn't help but laugh. He said, Take your time. There's no rush. Actually, I confessed to grandmother a few days ago. Yi Chanshan looked up and widened her eyes. She said angrily, You played me. As she spoke, she was about to hit him. Shinjilia held her hand. There was a smile in his eyes, and his gentleness was unspoken. It's just a child. Let's take it slow. Actually, grandmother already relented a few days ago. Relented? Yi Chanshan was a little confused. What did he mean? Didn't you notice that grandmother wasn't as harsh when you came this time? Yi Chanshan laughed when she heard that. I really didn't. Shinjilia nodded her head helplessly and said, You'll slowly realize that grandmother has actually given up. Hey old Shen. Yi Chanshan hugged Shinjilia's waist and looked aggrieved. Do you think we're going through a trial? Why are there so many things blocking the way when I want to be together? It makes me wonder if God is jealous of my beauty. Shinjilia burst into laughter. Don't worry. God isn't just jealous of your beauty. Yi Chanshan was delighted to hear that. Does that mean that you admit that I'm pretty? No. I suspect that God appreciates your shamelessness. That's why he's giving you some practice. Yi Chanshan's face darkened. She pushed him away and said, F***CKU. Shinjilia laughed out loud. He couldn't help but reach out to hold her chin and press her face down. When his lips touched hers, he felt a sense of satisfaction and excitement that was hard to contain. Shinjilia slowly pressed her against the door and gently pried open her pearly white teeth. He stirred them delicately and delved deeper. After more than 4 months apart, their feelings for each other had deepened, and their longing for each other had deepened. No matter how many difficulties there were in the middle, he managed to overcome them. There was no reason for him to give up at the last moment, was there? Yi Chanshan narrowed her eyes. She couldn't help but hug him and respond gently. Chapter 1887. Shinjilia's palm was a little cold, and Yi Chanshan shrank back. Shinjilia seemed to have sensed it too. He retracted his hand, held her waist, and lifted her up. Yi Chanshan gasped. Before she could react, Shinjilia had placed her on the bed. Because no one was staying in the room, the bedsheets, quilts, and pillows had been put away. There was only a mattress on the bed. Yi Chanshan felt a little strange, but Shinjilia didn't feel it. He pressed his body against hers, ran his fingers through her hair, and kissed her lightly. Yi Chanshan squirmed and turned her head away. Panting slightly, she said, Make the bed. Yeah. Shinjilia was a little reluctant. Yi Chanshan gently pinched his waist, and Shinjilia reluctantly stood up. There were clean bedding in the cabinet. After Shinjilia removed it, Yi Chanshan took it from him and opened the dustproof bag. Shinjilia removed the dustproof cloth from the other furniture in the room. After that, both of them were quite busy. After much effort, they finally finished making the bedsheets, putting in the quilt and pillows. Yi Chanshan was covered in sweat. There was heating in the north. Yi Chanshan hadn't even taken off her down jacket since she entered the room. After busying himself, his face was flushed red from the heat. She unzipped her jacket, but it was still hot. She took off her sweater, leaving only a white, tight-fitting, long-sleeve t-shirt on her upper body. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of a pair of ferocious eyes in the mirror not far away. Yi Chanshan made up her mind. As soon as she turned around, she was pounced on. Yi Chanshan reached out her hand, but before she could struggle, she was pressed down on the bed. Shinjilia bit down on her mouth like a wolf. His big hands moved up and down. Just as he lifted the hem of Yi Chanshan's shirt, she heard a knock on the door. Yi Chanshan's eyes flew open. She made up her mind and pushed Shinjilia hard. Shinjilia looked at the ceiling helplessly and sighed. He straightened his clothes before standing up to open the door. Old Mrs. Shin stood at the door and looked at Shinjilia. "It's time for dinner. So early?" Shinjilia began to suspect that the old lady was deliberately there to cause trouble. When old Mrs. Shin heard that, she snorted and said, "It's getting late. It's already 5:50 p.m. If it weren't for the fact that I don't think you can finish in 10 minutes, I wouldn't have come to call you." Shinjilia was stunned when he heard that. His face darkened as he asked, "Grandma, what the hell are you up to this time?" Yi Chanshan, who was hiding in a corner, blushed when she heard that. "What can I do?" The old lady snorted. "I just saw that you guys stayed in there for so long. You must not have finished cleaning up the house. You can't finish it in 10 minutes. You can clean up after eating." Shinjilia was speechless. He had thought. Yi Chanshan's face turned even redder. She shut her eyes tightly and looked embarrassed. Damn it, she thought the old lady knew what they were doing. How embarrassing. Shinjilia pursed his lips and replied, "Got it? Let's clean up a little longer." Hurry up." After saying this, the old lady turned around. Yi Chanshan had already put on a sweater. When she looked in the mirror, she realized that her lips were a little swollen. She licked them a few times and rubbed them. She tried to look as natural as possible. "It's time for dinner." Chapter 1888. I said it's time for dinner. Why are you still lying down? Get up. Yi Chanshan tugged at him. Grandma seems to be very powerful. I'm a little scared. What's there to be scared of? Shinjilia lay on the bed, feeling a little bored. Wouldn't it be better to spend some alone time in Kingstown? I can't do anything now. It's too cruel. Yi Chanshan didn't know what he was thinking. She looked around and said, "How did Grandma know? Did she put a surveillance camera or something in the room?" Shinjilia laughed and said, "How could that be possible? My grandmother isn't that perverted." But why did she knock on the door so suddenly? It's a coincidence, a coincidence. Shinjilia got up and looked at Yi Chanshan with a helpless expression. How can you have such a big imagination? You can magnify everything. I have to give it to you. Yi Chanshan pouted and said, "But this is too much of a coincidence. I think this kind of coincidence is too scary." Of all times to knock on the door, it had to be at such an indescribable time. Of all times to call for dinner, it had to be 10 minutes in advance? Yi Chanshan felt a little uncomfortable thinking about it and said, "Old Shen." "Yes. I don't think it's appropriate for me to stay in your house without an official title." Shinjilia stared at her with amusement in his eyes. At the same time, there was a hint of menace in them. Yi Chanshan felt a little uncomfortable under his stare and said, "I don't think it's appropriate. Why don't I? Grandma is actually a very good person. Now that she's finally relenting, you shouldn't shrink back." Shinjilia sighed softly. "If you shrink back now, it'll only worsen the good signs." But what could she do? She always felt that the old lady was too mysterious. If she let him stay here alone, would he see a ghost in the middle of the night? Or perhaps a ghost would press down on him. That would be terrible. Yi Chanshan was a little hesitant. Shinjilia reached out and pulled her over. He said softly, "All right, don't think about it anymore. It's not a big deal. You're just too nervous." Yi Chanshan didn't believe him. "Is that so?" Shinjilia gave her a look of certainty and said seriously, "Of course it's true. Let's go for dinner." Can I wear this?" Yi Chanshan was wearing a mint green turtleneck sweater, which looked quite warm. "But if I don't wear a jacket, will I look weird?" Shinjilia didn't mind. It's our home. It's nothing. Didn't Grandma like you a lot in the beginning? Don't be nervous. Mom and Dad have a good impression of you. All right, Yi Chanshan replied. She finally relaxed a little. Shinjilia stood up and said, later on, if you don't know how to speak properly, don't speak. Whatever the elders ask you, just say it. Do you understand? Okay, I'll try my best. Shinjilia was a little worried, but it was almost time. If he didn't go out now, grandmother would have a problem with him. When he went out, the whole family was present. Shinluo, and seemed to have just returned from a trip. He was still wearing his jacket and it looked a little damp. When she saw Yi Chanshan, she didn't immediately recognize her as the girl who had been holding Shin Manting's cell phone. He smiled and nodded, saying, hello. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.